Hello, YouTube, and welcome again to analysis of our Arena Championships 5 Explorer games. We did rounds 4 to 6 last time, and now it's time for the day 2 rounds, so rounds 7 to 9. And it's great to have Ryan Condon back again with me to analyze. How are you doing, Ryan?
Doing good, doing good. I'm glad we're getting back to this. I don't want to let it go too long before, I forget everything about this deck. I'm also planning on writing like a kind of a primer for it for my Patreon this week. So yeah, it's good to be able to get this practice back in.
Yeah, and Outlaws of Thunder Junction is already live. We're taking time out of our limited playtime, and that's a bit also urgent. We need to finish this so that we can go to new
Go
greener
right back into
pastures.
drafts. I certainly need more practice with OTJ because I have not been doing very well with it so far, and there's more strategies I need to try out. So
Yeah.
yeah, but this is great too. I mean, I love getting super deep into games with fellow good players. So I'm looking
Yep.
forward to it.
Very quick, very short meta update with the release of OTJ into Pioneer and Explorer. This Flying Haste plot killing fiend is making some waves, getting mono red back on top. That's a pretty bad matchup for Quint Combo, I would say, because they would probably kill you faster than you can kill them.
Yeah, haven't tested it at all, but Consecrate Consume does not do quite as much against that card. So our sideboard plan might need some adjusting.
Yeah, but we get Spinewood's Armadillo, which is an upgrade over the Herd Migration, so that's a nice one. Can be milled by Giruda.
True.
Um,
Minor upgrade, but an upgrade
yeah,
nonetheless.
and well, Mono Red usually does well in a new meta, and then like decks adjust to it, and then they kind of hit it out. It's kind of easy to adjust to that deck, but just saying that I haven't played a lot of Explorer slash Pioneer, but I can see Quint not being the right meta call if aggro is what is the hotness right now.
Yeah, very true that this was a specific deck choice for a specific tournament that is now almost 3 weeks old. So we will be going through the games for this, but the meta has shifted, and yeah, Magic is hard and it continues developing
Mm-hmm.
as time goes on.
Cool. Getting right into the games, and round 7 was versus MantisRhino, also known as Marvin Chiong, who even tweeted us that he was a bit sad that he had given me 2 wins in the tournament. A super nice person. And they also said that it would have been great to be in our testing team. But this is also something I can tell to whoever's watching this video, that just participating in these high stakes tournaments also helps in your MTG networking. And when other events come up, you can always reach out to some of these people and you just make more friends, more like-minded people to compete. So it would be pretty cool to have Marvin Chung in a new testing team in the future.
Yeah, future teammate. And I will say, like, Glossu and I did not know each other at all before this tournament. Like, I basically knew no one coming into this. So it's a perfect way to, yeah, everyone just qualify for the Arena Championship and then you'll make some friends.
Yep. All right, getting into opponent's deck. Red Black Vampires, so not a huge surprise since it was like half of the field in this small 32 people tournament. But let's see what kind of version MantisRhino has over here. So no Archfiend of the Dross, but two 4 mana threats in Sheoldred and Kalitas. I have no idea how good Kalitas is compared to Sheoldred or Archfiend, but I mean it's a threat, right? Um,
Yeah, it seems probably worse against us for sure, just because it's from what I know, a card that is used mostly against like aggro decks and maybe graveyard combo aggro decks a little bit. So I would assume it's there for Amalia here, probably. Um, but yeah, it's still a threat, still a creature that can attack and, you know,
mhm.
get in there. This seems like a slightly interesting list. There's two Smuggler's Copter. Don't they usually run four? Um, what I'm
I
most interested in
hmm,
is the sideboard.
yeah, the sideboard is sorted by mana value over here. one cage.
Looks like there aren't a ton of options for them to bring in against us, like probably fewer than normal.
A second bitter triumph is relevant.
Very relevant. Yep, that's definitely coming in. The Liliana is definitely coming in. Blot out, both duresses. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then probably the Grafdigger's Cage just for our Garudas. So yeah, like there's enough to bring in to take out all the fatal pushes and maybe like the Dusk Legion Zealots and maybe even the Kalitas or the Preachers. But I think most of the lists in the tournament had more for us in the board. So I'm pretty happy if I'm sitting down against this blacklist.
And Go for the Throat does not answer Quint. Pretty bad card against Quint.
Right.
So that is also very relevant. That it's not like a second or a third bitter triumph. But yeah, it's good that there's no Archfiend of the Dross. That card is usually much worse, much better against the Quint combo. So that is good news. But yeah, I think many other lists did not run even any Smuggler's Copters, right?
Oh yeah, that might have been it. Actually, it's interesting.
So I know that it's been in some lists, but I think the official stock list has like 4 Dusk Legion Zealots, 4 Harvesters, and 0 Copters. And I think all the vampires synergize well with the Cavern of Souls as well as with Sorin. So maybe that's why Copter is usually left on the side. But it's definitely a very valid card in the deck. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, did the LSV, like the PT list run Copters, or am I totally misremembering that?
I don't remember.
I think they were just on 4 Dusk Legion Zealots. Yeah, I think that's right. So no Copter, which is funny because when Copter was first like going to be released on Arena, we all thought, oh, that's a very relevant update to the format, bringing it closer to Pioneer. But kind of turns out it hasn't been a huge player, just because Copter's sort of leaving Pioneer in relevance more. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it got banned in Pioneer a long time ago, and now that it's been unbanned, it's clear that the power creep has caught up. It's still a good card, and it still sees its time, but it's not like oppressing the format or anything of the sort. So, yep. Let's get into games. The first game, we're on the draw. Okay. We had to switch to Ryan's computer since 17 Lands is having a bit of lag serving the images in Europe, but looks like the US is delivering them promptly, so we didn't want to put the viewers on torture.
Privileged Americans.
But yeah, this opening hand, how does this look like?
Yeah, this looks good to me. It obviously doesn't have perfect mana, but it's got pretty good mana. You're missing blue for Spark Double and a potential Clever Impersonator, and obviously you're going to need a blue or a black for Garuda, but it's got one of each threat. So basically, like, you will not have a problem at all with having your combo pieces this game. And you've got 3 lands, which is like the minimum you need to be able to operate. Spark Double's pseudo dead, but we don't really care about that. I think this is a good enough hand to keep play or draw in like most matchups. If you're against like Amalia, maybe not because you don't have enough interaction, but this hand also lets you use Carnosaur for interaction. So I think this is a pretty easy keep for me.
Yeah, I would agree with you. We do need to find a source for Garuda, possibly Spark Double, but the possibility to use Carnosaur as interaction because we already have a Quint in hand is definitely very appealing. So I definitely would keep this right now. I hope the tournament me also did so. We can maybe check if...
Looks like you did.
Looks like I did. So tap Blood Crypt. We draw the Sacred Foundry, which is an extra land. We get Thought Seized.
They're taking the Quint there. That's typically how decks try to attack us. I could see them taking the Carno, but the Quint is a turn faster, so it makes sense. Draw the Triumph, so we want to get that in.
So now we have blue and black, so that's also great.
Yep. Not under any pressure yet, which is a good sign.
They didn't play Sorin into Vein Ripper, so we love to see that.
Yeah, that's always the scary turn, but no action on that turn. It does indicate they probably have like a Bitter Triumph that we should be aware of, I think, or some kind of interaction that isn't like they would have slammed any threat basically there. So they probably have an interaction heavy hand,
Mhm.
or just a very awkward hand. But I can't really imagine something they would have
Mhm.
kept that is just like a single Thoughtseize with
Is
nothing
is
else
it
to back it
is
up.
that a second Blood Crypt tapped, or is it just like a tap land that they couldn't play untapped,
It was a Blood Crypt, yeah. So they could have cast a Fable or a Sorin if they wanted
or
to.
a Preacher or whatever? So
Right.
we can read that they don't have
So
any.
probably like a 4 drop. I could see reading Shieldred here.
Mhm. But no threat, no 3-drop threat. Vein Ripper could be in hand, but no Sorin. Could be some fatal pushes maybe
Yeah.
also that are stranded. So um,
Yep.
so here, do you play the tap land?
Oops, sorry.
Spoilers, I played the swamp.
Here. Yeah, so it's really it's the question of, do you want to buy Karuga this turn or do you want to leave up your binding? Um, Karuga is the more efficient play, so I think I would just probably do that. If I'm not buying Karuga, I think I'm playing your Jetmir's Garden. I could also see cycling it, but we have enough threats, and I kind of just want to make sure we'll have the 6th land untapped to play them. So here, I think I'm buying Karuga, and then my secondary play that could also be decently right is just tap land, pass, plan on binding whatever 4-drop threat they have.
Mm-hmm.
How about you? What are your thoughts?
um, yeah, as stated last time, I think I'm a bit more prone to cycling lands than you are, and I like to have Carno binding and cycling land up. That's my instinct at this point, but
Most
I,
number of options, yeah.
yeah, but buying Karuga makes a lot of sense. Puts another 5-drop in hand, which will draw a card if we binding something the next turn. So I don't know. I played the swamp over there. I don't know if I bought Karuga after that. But
It looks like just a
yeah.
pass, which, yeah, you're leaving up the most optionality you can.
Mm-hmm.
I think this would be a case where I'm thinking this is my window to get Karuga into my
Mm-hmm.
hand, and I can binding whatever they play next. And I'm not super concerned about getting the cycling land out of my hand because we've got 2 6 drops, and we just want to hit our land drops anyway.
Yep.
But yeah, I can see the line. I think I would have taken a different one though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's see what comes up. There is the four
Yep,
drop.
that 4-drop. Luckily, it's not Shieldred, although it doesn't really matter because we're probably binding it anyway, given that we want to draw a card with
Yes.
Karuga.
Pretty sure that's what I do. Yep.
Yep.
So then your line of
Tap land.
having bought Karuga last turn, we could now play another tap land and binding the Kalitas, which I think leaves us in a better spot than leaving all the options open. But I think I just wanted to keep the option of cycling. Since they didn't play anything on 3, maybe they just have all removal and we just accelerate to our combo. But I do think your line
we
was...
we will want a heavy threat, density if they're just sitting on a handful of removal. But yeah, I do think it's marginally better to have Karuga in hand this turn and not have had the option to cycle. Although obviously that's dependent on what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, here is pretty easy. I think you just play a tap land, and
By Karuga.
I guess I would probably buy Karuga.
I think I buy Karuga now. Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you do. Pass back. We're at their mercy. See what they do. Just a Mutavault attack. Not very scary. A land. Interesting. So I assume, Martin here was debating whether to Thoughtseize, given that he had taken Quint, so he knew you probably just had the 6 drops, but there was a chance you had one unknown card, so you could have drawn a Quint there.
Mm-hmm.
And whether to take that away is an important call.
Yeah.
I don't know what's in his hand, but this seems correct to me. I think you're going to want to Thoughtseize at some point, and get rid of probably the Carno, just because that's the deterministic version of the combo, where Garuda is not quite as deterministic, and just hope that you're whiffing on the Garuda.
And if you don't have a Bitter Triumph in hand, then you definitely need to try to interact somehow.
Yes, for sure. So yeah, take Carno, which makes sense. And no pressure. So we draw the Cavern, and my instinct here is I probably put Cavern on Illusion just so I can cast an Impersonator if I need to. We've got double red, we've got double blue, we've got Garuda mana. So I think I want Cavern on Illusion, and I do want to play Karuga this turn just to put something on board, start a little bit of pressure, dig for a card, open up our Spark Double. Just makes a lot of sense to get that down. That's where I'm at.
One caveat to what you said: we don't put it on Illusion; we put it on Shapeshifter. The Clever Impersonator.
Apologies. Yes, we put it on the creature type of Clever Impersonator, which I was misremembering.
Yep, it's Shapeshifter. But I think that's what makes a lot of sense. Either that, or you suck in the Sacred Foundry and play the Kiruga. But I think strictly better is to play the Cavern on Shapeshifter, play the Kiruga, because we could draw into more untapped lands, and we don't need to play a land that shocks our face.
Very, very small downside to life at this stage in the game. Isn't super relevant, but it always can be. And yeah, given that it's hard to recognize, but we are in the state where there's only one correct option to name on Cavern, so holding it doesn't actually increase our optionality very much, and we're not playing against a counterspell deck, so that aspect doesn't matter. I think it is correct to play the Cavern, but not super wrong. Like your strong default is just to save your Caverns, which I think is smart while playing this deck.
Okay, and draw.
So we play Karuga, we draw Carno, which is great. That's exactly what we want to see. Just more threats in case they top deck another Thoughtseize. We are rolling this game so far. I'm feeling good.
And despite shocking myself without a need, I'm still at 16. So that's exactly where you want to be.
Yep, totally.
Harvester is not scary.
Get out of Harvester. Yeah, not very scary, and pass back. So yeah, the question is basically, do we slam here? And probably yes is my answer. And then the follow-up is just which do we slam? Carno is guaranteed to get us a clone. The opponent does not have double removal up. So even if we get into, we cycle into or discover into a clone and not a Quint, and they remove our Carno, we are still going to be able to copy Karuga. If it's a Clever Impersonator, that's a little worse because it just means we draw 2 cards and we don't continue developing our board, or we could get the Leyline Binding, I guess, if we really wanted to. But we're more likely still to hit a Spark Double over an Impersonator. It's 3 out of 5 that we'd hit a Spark Double, and then we also have 4 Quint in our deck that we're just going to win if we hit. So I'm pretty sure that it's a Carno slam here. Well, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Pretty much everything you said. I do think Carno is the better threat over here. We have a Karuga that we can copy as a clone if they have the interaction, and otherwise, if we hit Quint, we probably just auto win from there. So,
and noting Cavern on Shapeshifter.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, and I played
Demon.
So even here, I haven't made the optimal choices, right? But it should have been Shapeshifter.
Yeah, there's some very, very minor, but definitely technically relevant choices that we're missing on. And we hit the Impersonator. So now we're like, okay, this is the worst option if they have removal, which they do, and they've had a hand that indicates they've played as if they had a hand that has removal in it, so that makes sense. And what are we cloning with the Impersonator?
Honestly, it could be the Binding, since we have the Spark Double in hand, and we could copy the Karuga next turn. They only have a Go for the Throat in the main that could answer the Karuga at instant speed at this point. They've already used the Bitter Triumph, so maybe copying Leyline Binding, taking out the 3/2, because if they have a second Harvester, then they could sack the Harvester to kill Karuga. That is something also to take into account. It's not the worst to copy Karuga and draw 2 cards either, but I think I like copying the Binding here at this point a bit better.
Yeah, I think I might actually like copying the Karuga better if they're going to be killing Karuga with a second Harvester. Although, no, I guess if you take away their first Harvester, then they can't do that. So that would be the reason to copy the Binding. Yeah, drawing 2 cards is good. It can definitely dig you towards more threats, and that's pretty important. And right, I am a little worried about going down to a single Karuga because if they get rid of it, then our Spark Double is really dead. And so I'd kind of like to be drawing cards. But I think you're right that they don't have enough removal in their deck. They have one specific card, Go for the Throat. And if they're using that on Karuga, then we can Garuda and mill into a clone and be off to the races. So I think you're right. I think it actually is binding. I don't think I would have done binding. I probably would have done Garuda and been wrong. Yeah, copying binding. I like it.
Binding. I didn't remember that I copied binding, by the way. I just
yeah, you were just trying to read the right play.
It's how I see the game right now and what I would do. So my tournament me could be doing different things.
Yeah.
So what did they bin?
And you're putting them under some pressure here. They're at 8. They're digging with the blood. Let's see what they discarded. Discarded the Vein Ripper. So they're thinking that is not going to get them there. Which makes me think they probably don't have a land, would be my guess. And they're trying to find like 2 spells they can play next turn.
Yeah.
That's 1.
Ours to number 2.
And 2. Okay. So they're fighting, but this Garuda is going to be a problem for them, assuming we don't completely whiff.
So relevant that we would have lost our Karuga because they had a second harvester. And they could like then sack the harvester as we predicted. So
I would say relevant, although in the category of decisions where you're kind of making that decision with full knowledge of their deck, and it's not really based on reading their behavior in the game, at least for me as much. And so I think what they actually had does not feel super relevant to me in terms of deciding what was the right play. But they did have it, so it is, worth noting.
And we are very favored in this game because we have a Garuda also to continue. So, I mean, worst comes to worst. So do I play Karuga here instead of the Garuda? I think I should slam Garuda over here.
I think you should slam Garuda, because you have the Spark Double to copy it as a follow-up next turn, even if they kill one of the 2. So your Spark Double, I don't think is in much danger of being dead. And this obviously has a chance to just kill them outright. They're at 8, so even building up a reasonable board on our end, let's say we hit a Shieldred, right? That's still going to be probably good enough. They're drawing cards with Fable next turn. I think it's don't overthink it and slam Garuda here. That's my play.
All right, let's see.
I went with the Spark Double.
I went with the Spark Double.
Drawing cards is appealing. You're drawing a lot of cards, but I do think that was probably wrong. Not that it will end up mattering. I don't think we seem to be quite far ahead. They go 3. They discard 1 card to the Fable. 1 card is interesting, not 2.
What can get them out
we could spend some time figuring out if they have a specific card that they're trying to hit to have a 2 combo that gets them out of it. I guess Sorin Ripper, maybe, assuming we have no threats in hand. But I don't think it's worth spending too much time because it doesn't really impact our decisions very much.
I don't think there's anything that saves them at this point because we have a Carno also.
Knowing that we have the Carno. Yeah, let me slam it. Hit the Quint and off to the races. There you go. Nice, easy game.
It was nice that we're not under pressure, so we could just continue to do things, even though we got Thoughtseize twice, and even though they had the Bitter Triumph in hand, just got there. And my play was not optimal with the Cavern or buying Kiruga. I could have done it 1 turn earlier. I should have slammed the Garuda over there, but well, sometimes you get those easy games against Vamps too, which is nice to see.
Right, totally.
Second game, again on the draw.
On the draw, this hand. So got a clone, pseudo dead, although less dead against Vamps if they go their Sorin Ripper start. 2 lands, a Ramper, and threats. For me on the draw, this is a pretty comfortable keep in terms of knowing that it's the right decision. And then as soon as I make what I know is the right decision, I am starting to sweat about drawing lands. That's my stance here.
Yeah, we really only need 1 land, and we are kind of happy. Hopefully an untapped one so that we can ramp on 3.
Assuming they don't Thoughtseize our Beanstalk, but the Vamps players we played against in the tournament seemed pretty prone to taking Quints and Carnos at the first opportunity. So I doubt that they would take our Beanstalk, although I think it could be correct against a hand like this.
I think it would be, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm good keeping it, and we'll have to get there, but you have to get there with almost every hand. That's kind of the point of the deck.
We play almost half lands in our deck, right? So
right, that's why you play 28.
Yeah. So I do think it's a keep.
All right, yeah, looks like you kept in the tournament. No Thoughtseize on turn 1, which is a good player thing. I think most of the time with Vamps, it's not going to be correct to Thoughtseize your Quint opponent on turn 1. You want to give them the time to draw the Quints and then take it away on the key turn. So yeah, we draw, looks like a Carno. That's not a land, but we still have a couple more cracks at it and just pass back. Here's the Thoughtseize. All right, that makes sense. It seems like they probably have figured out they need to fit it into their curve somehow. So I would guess this means that they have a 3-drop to play next turn. That's probably what I'm assuming based on a turn 2 Thoughtseize.
Yep, I agree.
And they take Beanstalk, which, yeah, smart play.
Good play.
Very smart play. Yep. And so now we are even more needing to draw lands. We'll be able to use Carnos as disruption if we draw another one. But yeah, we really need to hit that 4th to be able to get up to 6 to our Garuda.
Yes. Hey, there's
good.
a land.
All right, we hit 1. The tap land, which means we'll be a little slower, but that's okay. I would much rather see that than anything else.
Beggars can be choosers, right? We do get land.
Right. Yep, there's the 3-drop. So they kept in Preacher, which I'm noting because that's one of the cards that I could see them taking out, although their sideboard was not super well set up against us. They only had basically like 5 to 7, 6. Yeah, they had 6 cards, maybe 7, that are like at all relevant to bring in against us. So they're cutting the 4 Fatal Pushes, which means they only are cutting like 3 additional cards. I could see Kalitas coming out. I could see Dusk Legion Zealots coming out. And so that's only if you're bringing in like Aklazot's and Grafdigger's Cage as well. These 5, I'm pretty sure, are coming in.
Yep.
We're doing the sideboarding discussion now, but it's relevant based on like the fact that they kept in Preacher. Should we expect a Grafdigger's Cage? Should we expect an Aklazot's? Puts my credence on expecting either of those cards. Just a small tick down seeing Preacher here.
Yep. Yes, I agree. Preacher is not like the best threat against our deck. It's a bit too slow, but like you said, looks like there's not a lot of sideboard options that would be better suited against us. I don't think Aklazot's is good against our deck. I mean, it's super slow. So all things considered, maybe Preacher is one of the few threats that they can actually use. But yeah, we can continue.
Yeah, so we see the Preacher under a little bit of pressure now, but not a ton. Don't draw a land, just have to play our tap land and still have nothing to do. This is one of the spots this deck can find itself in, which is awkward, but you have to accept these draws sometimes. So we are just at the mercy of our opponent. They take the other ramper, and we are just stuck needing to draw land. We just want as many lands as possible here.
Noteworthy is that if we draw an untapped land, we can play the Impersonator on the Preacher.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Which could block, draw us cards, try to get there. Although I don't think it will be drawing cards very much because we are falling behind on life total. Play land. All right, Beanstalk counts. We'll take it.
Yep, not a land technically that we wanted, but hey, it is something.
We are getting hit back. Life total for sure under pressure now.
That's also a nice little thing that Preacher, if the life totals are tied, then it makes the token and draws a card. So
yeah, and really good players can manage that with like pain lands and stuff.
Yep.
That's a level of Magic that I haven't quite reached in terms of a mid-range deck, but we'll get there eventually. Yeah, so now the Blood Tithe, did they tank here? Were they thinking about leaving up interaction?
I think they did.
Obviously 17 lands doesn't really show it, but that's relevant information for me just to try to clock whether they have the removal spell in hand.
I'm not sure if they tanked. I can't remember, to be honest.
Yeah, no worries. Just noting that would be a spot where I'm thinking, okay, they have 2 mana. Were they thinking about what to do with it, or were they just like, I have one option, I'm just going to do this?
But also they know.
Not that it ends up scripting our plays really, because like we are just sort of helpless in this game. We don't really have anything to do besides slam our threats as soon as we can. But
I think even if they have the removal spell, it's wrong to keep it up because they know our whole hand.
I agree.
We don't have a Quint, and we cannot draw Quint
And we don't
and
have a
land.
land.
So
right.
it's impossible that we combo next turn.
Don't draw a land, and it's looking pretty dire. Although we could have played the Impersonator. We are trying to leave up a Carno, it looks like.
I think I should have played Impersonator on the Preacher, I guess. Try to stem a bit of the bleeding.
That is a place where the fact that we think they could have a removal spell ends up maybe being relevant.
True.
Whether or not you impersonate or just try to remove something. Yeah, I think impersonate on the Preacher is probably a little bit better because it's sort of like you're playing toward the best case scenario.
Yes.
Where your Preacher genuinely holds off their entire board besides for the other Preacher. And I think that's right.
But we're just dead in two cycles, right? And we can't draw something that will let us combo next turn yet. And just because there's a Mutavault, I think even killing the Harvester and then the Mutavault, we're still dead, right? So I think playing the Impersonators, somehow trying to stem the bleed and assume that they don't have any removal is the best. But to be honest, it's not looking very good.
It gives us the closest thing to an out we can have. But yeah, here there's just not much that lets you survive. They take that. We draw a tap land. Can't do anything. And yeah, we'll skip through the rest. We are dead. Sorin killed us quite easily.
Yep.
Yeah, one of those games. Game 1 was one of the easy games. Game 2 was one of the, also easy, but we lost. There weren't many important decisions, but that was because we were so far behind.
We kept that hand, right? We didn't mulligan that hand, and sometimes we don't get their own lands. It was the correct keep.
Correct.
Normally we would have drawn a few more lands, and then we could get back into that game just by getting to land 6, play the Carno, where suddenly we win that game, right? So we just didn't draw our lands, and opponent very correctly took our Rampers out of our hand. So
and that won them the game.
All
right. Game 3, rubber match. Lots of pressure. Today you need to 3-0 to make the top 8, so this is critical.
Well, we get a pretty nice hand of 3 basics. There's not that many hands that we get.
You almost never see that in this deck. Yeah.
Well,
so it means our ley line is tough to cast, but if at any point we draw a Triumph, it will become pretty trivial to cast. And worst case, we can play it on turn 3 here. Not that difficult. We've got a lot of red sources in our deck. I trust us to draw one. I'm probably tutoring up the white first with this hand. It's a little close because we do eventually want double red, but we also really want to be able to ley line.
Yep.
I'm skipping ahead to the gameplay because I'm pretty confident in keeping this hand. It's got an A, B, C. We've got our mana. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. We've got threats and we've got disruption / ramp. So this is a confident keep for me.
I agree with everything you said. And yes, I think I did fetch the white, and that's what I would do also in this instance. So keep.
Nice. Keep. Opponent also on 7. They pass back, no turn 1 Thoughtseize. Makes sense playing against a good player. They play out the Harvester, so we are under some pressure. Clock is ticking. We've drawn the Cavern, which notably can be a second red. For our Dino, at least, not for our Quint.
I think it's funny how sometimes we've been like this tournament, like just untap land. And now that we want like the tap lands that are many different basics, we get all the untapped, right? But it just happens sometimes.
So you get the plains, which I like. And we draw a red source, which is great. And so this is an interesting spot, right? Are you trying to get your red source down, or are you trying to keep the pressure off of yourself with binding? What are your thoughts?
Interesting spot for sure.
Very interesting, yeah.
I'm right now.
We're never cycling this land, I'll tell you that much, Glass.
I think right now I like putting the Ketcha Triumph, and then possibly next turn keep both Leyline Binding and Carnosaur up, And then if we get to turn 5, we just quint and win. So I like playing the catch here right now. I think it gives us more options. But I could also see putting the planes and removing that threat immediately.
Yeah, it costs us 3 life. And in theory, we still have the option of buying Karuga and playing the tap land next turn. But you're right that playing the tap land now would also allow us to binding plus buy Karuga next turn, and it would let us binding plus leave up Carno.
Yes.
And both of those are relevant options. I think it's worth taking 3 damage to both get our tap land in, especially if we're drawing more tap lands. That's going to unlock our ability to get them out faster, just because we already have one of them down, and give us the optionality of leaving up 2 interaction spells or single interaction spell plus Karuga next turn. Binding could maybe not be used on the Harvester. It doesn't put us under that much pressure. So if they play a Fable, maybe we want to binding that, or something else. Some turns go by and we are binding like a Sheldred or whatever. So yeah, I agree with you. I think I like getting the tap land out. It's very, very close, interesting call, but I think you just basically want to make sure you don't have a clunky draw with lands as much as you can with this hand.
Yep. So does Tournament Me do that? No, Tournament Me.
No.
Bindings
We're
that
just binding.
immediately.
I think that's a totally defensible play. Because next turn, you're either gonna... I guess you're kind of locked into buying Karuga next turn, which is fine, but you won't be able to leave up Carno.
I think I took this line maybe because I liked having the option to Karuga on 5, because Leyline binding, then play the tap land, buy Karuga, and then I draw a card on 5 if they thought sees the Quint away. I think that's maybe why I did that.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's mostly equivalent in terms of how the game will play out.
Yeah. Anyway,
so here,
just seeing a Dust Legion Zealot as a continuation is just ecstatic for us, right? It's super good.
And no Thoughtseize, right? That's a great turn for us by our opponent, because they're not putting us under pressure and they're not interacting with us yet, and they're missing a land drop. So I don't really know what they're keeping up instead of blooding something away and trying to hit their land drop. I could see that being wrong, but I don't really know what's in their hand. I would assume their hand is pretty good besides not having lands. I'm guessing they have at least 1 removal spell, if not more. But yeah, we are pretty happy seeing that in general. And we have basically a scripted play this turn of just playing Karuga.
Yep.
So we do that. Now they're blooding. So they're not trying to hit a land drop, but they are trying to dig.
What did they bin, by the way? Just
oh yeah, let's see what they binned. A land.
Oh,
did I miss the fact that they played a land that turn?
They did.
Yes. I did. Okay, so they actually didn't miss a land drop. I was just not understanding that we'd been on the play. So never mind all that analysis. But yeah, so they discard a land end of turn. So actually it looks like they might have a land heavy hand by a bit. They get their duress off, which takes our Quint, means we can't win outright next turn. And all they can do is just pressure us a little bit with the Mutavault. We are back to 20 life. I am not super scared of the pressure right now. I'm feeling pretty good.
And a top deck Quint just wins the game, right? So
yeah,
it's looking good.
Got a Garuda, good for threat redundancy. A second Thoughtseize won't do much. And we have a scripted play again this turn. We are dinoing for our second red on Cavern, and we're playing out Karuga Dino. Drawing a Tanuki, which, is a relevant enough threat where if somehow the opponent is double disrupting us, getting the threats out of our hand this turn, then we can slam a 6/5 trample. We've already got a 5/4 on the battlefield. Maybe we can win a fair game. I like that draw.
Yep. And I want to point out that most of the games on camera, you were able to play these dumb threats like Tanuki and the Beanstalk Giant, and still win games that way. It's like
showcasing the full range of the deck. I think one of the announcers called it Plan C.5 or something.
Yeah. It was like Plan A is Quintorish, Plan B is Carnosaur, Plan C is Garuda, and then like Plan C plus Plan D, we still win with dumb threats, and it happens sometimes. It happens sometimes with this deck.
It's honestly, it can play as a ramp deck, not just a combo deck. You're ramping to limited threats, but hey, it's all good. Sometimes those win, especially if your opponent has used a bunch of resources to interact with you. So they're passing back to us here, which means they definitely have a lot of interaction. Um, they have a full grip or almost a full grip, 5 cards, and are just passing the turn. So they don't have any threats to deploy. Maybe they have a lot of lands. They did blood away one, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking like, okay, I'm gonna have to fight through stuff here. Luckily, our hand has plenty to fight through.
Yep.
So the decision here after we draw a clone. So not ideal, but it's a card that's relevant in a grind game if they can totally disrupt our combo. The question is, are we slamming Carno or Garuda?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right now,
and
right now
yeah,
myself,
what are your
I'm
thoughts?
inclined to slam Giruda since I think they have 2 pieces of interaction on board. And if we mill a Vein Ripper or a Sheoldred or something like this, it's just so bad for them. They can't really do much about that. And then the next turn is just a Carno, which is pretty much a win. So this is what I'm thinking right now. How about you?
Yeah, I like that line of thinking a lot. So against one interaction spell, I think Carno is probably better just because it will deterministically find you one more relevant threat. But I think it's important here to read your opponent on multiple pieces of interaction,
Yep.
and not assume that the game is just going to go smoothly for you, and try to imagine, how do I lose this, right? And I think the way you lose this is by going Carno into clone, getting both of your creatures killed. Your clone, which I'm assuming is a spark double, ends up doing nothing, and then you whiff on Garuda next turn, and they are able to like slam a Vein Ripper and kill you with that or something.
Exactly.
It's an outside chance, but I think that's your path to losing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not under any pressure. And so I like going Garuda this turn, force them to use at least one of those pieces of interaction just to disrupt your Garuda and make it less likely that you can combo off with it by milling a clone, or reroll at least by milling a clone, I should say. And do the slightly slower 2-step. I'm going to deploy my threats in a way that makes it hard for you to interact with. And I won't probably win the game this turn, but I'm going to win the game over 2 turns.
Yep.
So I like that line a lot. And yeah,
And
that's what you go
that's
with.
what I
Very
do.
smart. I like it.
For
And what do we
mills.
got? We mill a spark double and another Garuda. They did not kill our Garuda in response to the trigger, which is very notable.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing on our opponent's yard, but that's fine. We get a reroll and another creature on board with the spark double. We're starting to amass a board that is just going to be impossible for them to fight against.
Yes.
So another reroll. What do we see? Got a Shieldred on their side, perfectly fine floor, and yeah, Sheffet Monitor on our side. So what do you take here? Do you take Shieldred or do you take the Monitor?
I remember I took the Sheoldred. I think it's a bit better than the
Costs 2
monitor.
less mana, but it's just a strictly better threat, I think. So yeah, I like that. All right, and yeah, get in with our 5/4. Why not? We've got
And
plenty of
nothing.
ground walkers.
So I don't know if I guess they just don't have anything in hand because why wouldn't they have tried to
Yeah,
remove Giruda?
right. And of course, right, like you're reading them on the strongest hand they could possibly have, given that they did the thing they did, which is just pass with a bunch of mana. And yeah, I think in theory, it's almost equally likely that they just have a bad hand full of lands when they do that. But if they have a bad hand full of lands, we're winning this game no matter
Exactly.
what, pretty
Exactly.
much. So it's really not worth thinking about, like, what do I do if they have the bad hand? Maybe playing Carno is better in that scenario because it wins you quicker, but I don't care about winning more. I just care about winning.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, luckily, it's good for us that they didn't have anything, didn't kill our Garuda in response to the mill trigger or anything. So yeah, we are feeling very confident here. Vein Ripper, that makes sense for like a land heavy hand. Maybe they have 2 of them or something, but at this stage, we're really not very scared of
Yep.
just one. And yeah, we're gaining life, we're casting Carno, we're comboing off, and
Just the overkill.
Yep, game. Nice. Perfect match against Vamps. We got one awkward game, but in the other 2, we were able to execute our plan, and our plan is definitely better. If we get to go off, I think they don't really have a shot.
Yeah, and after this match, Marvin Chiong told me like, I hope you win the next 2 matches and you get to top 8. Like so. Very very nice opponent, I have to say. It's also nice
Yeah.
to have like such people that you get to play with. And I'm really happy about that play on Giruda instead of Karno on that game 3. I think very smart.
It didn't end up mattering, but it was absolutely the correct play and hard to see, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think without a ton of experience with this deck, most people are just slamming Dino there.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, so round 8 versus Akio Matsuzaki and another Red Black Vampires.
Vamps was everywhere this tournament. We got so used to playing it. We were happy whenever we did because that's really what we wanted to line up against. But it does get repetitive for sure. So yeah, what do they have relevant in this list? Main deck, Maze Mind Tome is interesting. We had Raph playing that in the Waste Not list, but I hadn't seen it in Vamps yet.
Yeah,
got the one Bitter Triumph, one Heartless Act split, which most people had for the tournament, and it's good for us because Triumph can hit walkers, but Heartless Act can't.
Correct.
Yeah, what else do you notice?
Well, the 2 Archfiends, right? So, like, not every list included them. Those are Scary versus us. Also surprised about that Maze Mind Tome. A single copy, by the way, so it's, like, spicy. In the Waste Not, it makes a lot of sense to play the Maze Mind Tome. It feels super good. You sometimes get, like, extra mana when they discard lands, and you can use it, but you don't get that here. But I guess Akio Matsuzaki is thinking, like, I have tough time, like, fitting mana, and just scrying is good. Also, super spicy Leyline of Sanctity in the sideboard, by the way. It's like I'm gonna be better.
This was probably a deck that was metagamed against Waste Not. I think that's what I'm reading from the Tome and the Sanctity. He might have tested a lot against Waste Not and found that those two really helped.
Yeah.
That's what I would think.
I mean, if you get a Leyline of Sanctity in your opening hand, you also deactivate Vein Ripper's triggers. You deactivate Thought Seizes. You know, I mean...
Maybe it was for the mirror as well. Yeah.
It is interesting. But yeah, I mean, good that...
Not very good against us, so...
Not super good against us. There's 2 cages, right? Which is important against Giruda. A Duress, 2 blotouts, but only 1 Bitter Triumph is great news for us. And nothing else, really. So
yeah,
the 2 Archfiends
looks like
are good.
A list that again we're pretty well positioned against because it's tuned for decks that aren't us. 3 Fatal Push main actually, not 4. That's slightly good for them. I just noticed that.
Yeah, they have the 4th in the
other
sideboard.
Than that, not a ton noticeable. 4th in the sideboard, yeah. So like at least that helps them against us, but not other than that. Like there aren't really too many factors in this list. Beyond like they have a little bit less interaction than most, which is
Yep.
All right.
Okay, let's jump into the games. First one is on the play.
On the play. All right. So the classic 2 Spark Double hand, basically operating on 5. Only got 2 lands, but we've got ABC. We've got lands, good mana, not perfect. We don't have white for the binding, but good enough. And we've got threats, and we've got a ramper. So I think this hand definitely not perfect. If they thought these away our Tanuki, we might be in some amount of trouble. It's got 2 Spark Doubles who are kind of dead. But like, I'm keeping this on 5 certainly every time. And I could see better 6s, but I don't think they're super common. I'm pretty inclined to keep this. How about you?
Relevant to say that if this were a mulligan, it would be better than not being a mulligan because we can put a Spark Double inside the deck again, and our combo is less likely to fizzle that way. So if I were keeping this, I would like to be on a Mult to 5 or a Mult to 6 instead of.
I think I would vote for a Mult to 6 probably because having a Spark Double in hand can be relevant later, for Karuga or whatever. But yeah, no, you're right. Like I think the 6 card version of this hand is strictly better than the 7. I would say.
I don't remember if I kept or mold this. Seeing this and knowing that I'm on the play, I'm really tempted to mull because
play does make it harder.
There's
sure.
There's 2 lands.
To be on the draw.
Yeah, it's 2 lands on the play. On the draw, I'm keeping this for sure, but 2 lands on the play and 2 Spark Doubles in hand, which is already making this like looking a bit sketchy. I think it's a 50-50 mull or keep, honestly.
Yeah. it's not a great hand for sure. You have a significant risk of losing because you don't draw enough lands. I think I would keep, but could see it. I could see mulling and not being super sad about that. So let's see what you did.
I mulled.
Yeah, ship it back. All right, I can see that. And actually, I do like this next hand
Yeah,
better.
I do.
Has no threats at all, but we can trust ourselves to draw them, and we've got perfect mana. So
Yep. It's kind of wild to think like, oh, we had like threats in the previous hand. Here we don't have anything. We just have lands, but we like to see lands with this deck.
Right.
Our top decks are good.
Yeah. I think a lot of people starting off on this deck would be like, wait, what do you mean this hand is way better? But like, it is. You've got Herd Migration. If you really want to get to 7 mana and slam that, it can be decent in the Vamps matchup. You've got a Ramper. You can always buy Karuga, and like, you will draw threats. Even if you draw a Leyline Binding, right? That lets Karuga draw an additional card. If you draw a Clone, that's still action because you can get your island with the Herd Migration and copy their Vein Ripper. Like, yeah, our deck is going to be functional with this hand, and our functional deck is going to beat Vamps most of the time. So I'm pretty happy with this. Are we sending back the Overgrown Tomb, the Swamp? I think it's probably the Swamp.
I'm definitely sending back a basic because that way we never run out of basics. I wouldn't.
We have 2 searchers already.
I wouldn't send back the basic if it were our only basic in the hand, because then the shock from the shock lands is relevant. But considering we have 2 basics and we can probably play some of the shocks tapped, I think I'm sending back one of the basics and probably the Swamp, since we already have. That's exactly what I did.
Send back the Swamp. Makes sense. And yeah, on the play, there's like maybe, Sacred Foundry plus Triumph. Maybe you're playing Foundry first so that if you draw a Binding, you can do that. But you also have a 2-drop to play with the Herd Migration, and you want to be able to do that on turn 2. So if you play Triumph, is totally fine. We get Thoughtseize right away. All right. So yeah, they take Tanuki, which makes sense because it makes us a little bit faster. Migration is very slow. And we draw another one, Thoughtseize Bug.
Thoughtseize Bug.
Alive and well in 2024. So we're happy about that, obviously. Shock in so that we're planning on cycling the Herd. I think this is a play that not a lot of people make with this deck. I'm almost never planning on casting Herd Migration unless I top deck it late. Even in a matchup where it being resolved is really good and we have a land heavy, ramp heavy hand, I think you're totally right here to just be intending on getting it out of our hand, getting your second blue source so that you can draw Impersonator, not thinking too hard about it. Basically, kind of the same approach I take with the cycling lands. Like, they are lands unless it's a really obvious scenario where we don't want them to be lands. I take the same approach with Herd Migration.
I agree with pretty much everything you said, except I think I would take a red source like the mountain over here to make sure that we can play Quint and Carno.
Quint and Carno.
Although we also have the Ramper, so it's not like a super big deal. We're gonna get the sources anyway, a blue and a red.
But Ramper could easily get Thoughtseize this next turn or in a future turn. So yeah, no, I actually think you're totally right there. I'm too locked in on Impersonator probably in the Vamps matchup. You do have more red and white sources than blue sources, I believe, at this stage. But yeah, I think I like getting the second red just because it's so important for our actual threats.
But completely agree that Herd Migration in opening hand, it should be considered a land pretty much always. You don't want it to now draw only threats and you didn't cycle the Migration on 2 and then that comes back and bites you in the back for holding it. It also gains you 3 life, which is important in this matchup. So just cycle it 95+% of the time.
And the 2 mana is much harder to use on a later turn because you're usually spending all of your mana if you have 5 or 6 in play, just because all your spells cost that much. Yep. So yeah, you want to get it out of your hand early for sure. So yeah, under pressure with the Harvester. We cycle for a mountain. I like that a lot. Spark Devil, kind of a dead draw, but not much we can do about it. And yeah, the only decision here is, do we buy Karuga or do we cycle Tanuki? And I like cycling Tanuki for the island a lot because it sets us up with all of the colors we need and gets it out of our hands so that it can't be Thoughtseized.
Yep.
We can always buy Karuga later.
and we can always top deck a Quint, next turn and just,
Exactly. Yeah.
So like I like to put myself into positions where like top decks can win me the game with this deck. So
Totally. All right. What do we got on their end? Cavern on Vamp, pressure us a little bit, and do we have the Sword into Ripper? We don't. We've got Sword into Preacher, which is much less scary.
do you like this play, or would you just play the Preacher by itself?
For them, I like the play. I think you want to get Sorin down. It doesn't really matter how much loyalty Sorin is at on their end. Obviously, if they draw a Vein Ripper next turn, they'd like to be able to get that down, but Sorin actually pressures us quite a bit. It starts putting counters on these guys. I think we're on like a 2 or 3 turn clock with Thorin just because he can burn us out so easily. So I like the play. It's just the most mana efficient thing that our opponent can do.
I think I want to agree with you. I'm just pointing this out because it might seem awkward for some people. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
But like actually getting Sorin out in play for free, because otherwise you would need to spend 3 mana next turn to play it, makes a huge difference, because you can then put the counters. Yes, if you top deck a Vein Ripper next turn, then it's worse to have played the Sorin now, but I like it.
Yep.
So
we got our island. And just draw a Foundry. So yeah, we are in the game state of not having any threats, and we are basically assuming we will need to top deck 1 to win this game. And what do we do given that? We'll just try to set ourselves up to top deck as best as possible. So we could fake leaving up interaction here, or we could buy Garuga. Where are you at?
Well, if I fake having interaction, I need to put stops in the opponent.
Important consideration. Do we actually want to do that?
Which, by the way, I observed that when you were playing against Jesse Hampton, he was playing in full control the whole match, right? So no need to put stops if you do that. And I actually was unaware that you can play full control in these kind of tournaments. But faking interaction is a viable thing, just pointing out that you have to put a lot of stops. And it can also get a bit obvious. And it only lasts for 1 turn, because if you don't do anything 1 turn, like just a skilled opponent is going to know, like, okay, well, they just put stops.
I actually, on my feature match against Simona Skirve, I bluffed a Leyline Binding for multiple turns by holding control. And I was totally like inventing it as I went. I had not tried to do that really much in our testing at all. And I was just like, I'm just going to hold this for everything just to like not give away any information. And it actually worked. It bought me a couple turns. So I was pretty proud of myself for doing that. That was a great game 3 that happened to be on coverage if anyone wants to go watch. But anyway, yeah, it's really hard to do. And even like, you got to consider in something like this scenario, right? Are you gaining anything by leaving up interaction? Does it change the plays your opponent might make in a way that puts less pressure on you? I don't really think so. They don't have any incentive to not attack you. They don't really have any incentive to like leave up interaction, because if you're slamming your threat, it's going to be main phase on your turn, and it will be very obvious how they want to interact to try to disrupt your combo. So I like buying Karuga here, basically just saying, hey, try to kill me as fast as you can, because you're going to do that anyway.
Yep. Going back to the fake interaction, I do remember that I held priority in the early turns, faking having a Leyline Binding in hand, with like a Jedmir card.
And then for what it's worth, you can still do that here, even when you buy Karuga.
Exactly. I was gonna point that out, but I did on early turns. I would like play Jedmir's Garden the next turn, play a Zagoth, and like hold the priority. So like telling people I have a Leyline Binding in hand, and then the next turns it's usually easy because 3 mana plays you already can hold up and stuff. So it is worth confusing the opponent a bit like that. And what I was going to say here is like you can actually do both. You can bite Karuga and you can fake having a Leyline Binding in hand. So I think that's the correct, all things considered play. So I think that's what I did.
Ooh, unless 17 lands is showing you're tapping wrong.
No,
I did not leave up the binding.
Auto tapper got me. Auto tapper got me.
Oh yeah, it's so notorious. So I'm sure what happened here is you hovered over Karuga. It showed you the lands it would tap, and then you bought it and it tapped different lands. which happens a lot and is a really annoying feature of Arena Auto Tapper with this particular deck.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure he was auto
So,
tapping.
all right,
here.
well, yeah. The opponent knows now our shields are down. They're just trying to kill us as fast as possible. So I assume they're going to do that. Counter on the thing. That's just to gain themselves the most life in case we have a couple clones in hand and our combo can't go for the full 44 or whatever it ends up being. Haven't checked the sheet in a long time. They make a vamp and they lose a life. So they're getting the full preacher value, which is good for them. We're at 12. And let's see, what do they add to the board? Just a Dusk Legion.
Okay. And no land, so... Oh, yeah, there is the land.
No, they do. They have the Blood Crypt and leaving it untapped. But, okay, so they're playing out. They're going shields down, which makes me really think they just don't have removal and are making sure we're dead the next turn, because if we top deck something, they have nothing they can do about it. And they still have 2 cards in our hand that they don't see. So, yeah, they're basically completely telling us, I have nothing to interact with you. I'm just trying to kill you. This is a very face-up game from both players.
Yeah. I have to say, if they were to fake having interaction, that could cost them dearly, because they cannot kill us next turn without playing that Harvester. So
I think they probably can, right? They've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
But what if we
top, I guess they're one off.
What if we
and we're playing Karuga?
Yeah. What if we top deck a Leyline Binding or something? I mean,
right.
They're putting pressure for them is important over here.
Very much, yeah.
But I don't know. I do think like playing here to the board as much as possible is correct instead of faking removal. And we're in such a bad position. We're gonna slam a threat if we have it too, right?
Right.
So,
we're not gonna play around their removal. So why represent it? You know.
Exactly.
Yeah. They do that. We are dead next turn. This is the moment of truth. Love it. Love to see it. That's why you play this deck, folks. Top decks like that. And yeah, plays are scripted. Let's see what we get. Get a Spark. Impersonator. So now we're thinking, okay, we probably can't drain them completely, but we just want to hit a Quint at some point soon so that we can gain enough life where we're not dead and then kill them with our Dino board.
Yep.
So let's maybe do that. Yep. Next hit is a Quint. Perfect. And here's where you're just making sure that you don't remember or you don't forget how many clones are left in your deck. Doing that. And yeah, we make a Quint.
And the last...
And they concede.
They concede. The last clone should clone a Carnosaur. So we get again...
Correct. So we get another set of triggers. Yeah.
That's very important. Like I've played it now some mirrors after the AC5, and I've seen people like cloning the last clone on a Quintaurus when they have a Carnosaur out. Cloning a Carnosaur gets you another Quint, which is extra set of triggers. Very important.
And to be clear, you were going to do that here, right? I believe you had another Impersonator left in your deck.
I think that was the last.
It could have been. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think you had one left.
Oh, I had one left.
Okay. So I think we could have, but they conceded prematurely, so you're good. And look, even if you don't do that right in this spot, I think you're fine. You're at 18. They're at 12. Like even if you just have these 3 dinos and these 3 Quints, I think you're golden. But it is correct just to make an extra dino at the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, was looking very sketchy over there, but we got a lucky top deck.
Got bailed out.
Previous matches, we needed one untapped land, or we needed something, another kind of top deck, and finally in this match, we got the lucky top deck over here in game 1. So, love to see it, and love
take those.
Love to see, like a bit of compensation with the die roll too.
Yeah, it all balances out. All right. Next game 2. What are we thinking about this hand?
So for me, this is a clear keep, because we can play binding on 2, we can play binding on 3. We have 3 bindings, it's great. We have a threat. We just need to draw a few more lands, maybe a ramper, maybe more threats. But I feel super good with having 3 Leyline bindings in hand. It's
this is maybe the best hand I've seen all day. This hand draws 3 cards with Karuga, so we're really not worried about running out of gas. Resilient to Thoughtseize, maybe a little bit worried about drawing lands, but we have all 5 colors. We want double red and double blue, but we'll get there. That's what our mana base is built to do. And oh my gosh, we can keep pressure off of ourselves with ley lines. So this hand rocks. I'm like super happy with it.
This is insurance that you didn't know you had. One of the best
Yeah.
insurance deals.
Exactly. All right. So yeah, we keep that. Opponent's also on 7. And they lead on a cage. Interesting.
That does make our...
Yeah, well, we know how they sideboarded.
Yeah, that makes our Gyruda in hand look much worse. I'm like thinking, okay, I have 3 leyline bindings in hand. I can use 1 to remove the cage.
Right.
But just noting that, yes, that card answers one of our threats, Gyruda. It doesn't answer Carno or Quint, because those exile. But it does answer Gyruda. So right now it's a 6 mana 6/6 vanilla.
Yep. Although if we ever need it to be unlocked, we should have the ability to do that. All right. Cage. Draw another one. That's kind of funny. It just increasing our likelihood of binding a cage at some point in this game. Not putting us under much pressure. They're just kind of developing. We draw another tap land. I think I want to get that out and not leave up a binding here. Although it's worth considering because we have a lot of bindings we want to get rid of, and we will be able to play the tap land probably over the next couple turns. It's actually a closer decision than I was thinking initially. What are your thoughts?
I think I like playing a mountain and keeping the binding already on turn 2, because next turn we can play another tap land and still hold up another binding. So we have stuff to do the next turns, and we can take it a bit slower. We don't need to like ramp immediately.
Weirdly, playing the untapped land is sort of taking it slower here, but I think, I can see that for sure. I think the downside would be if you draw like a 3 mana ramper next turn, and then you have to play your untapped land to play that, and then that's leaving the last card in your hand as a tap land, which will make a future turn awkward at some point. But leaving up the binding does let us get rid of a Fable. It lets us interact over the next 2 turns instead of having only 1 interaction point there. So there's a real upside to it. And I think that's totally defensible.
I like to be able to answer the turn 3 threat that they're gonna play. Hopefully it's not a Vein Ripper. But I do
Vein Ripper we can't, but so it looks like you actually went with my original line.
I went with your line, but I do like putting an untapped land here now that I see this.
Yeah, I think they're pretty close. I don't think either is super wrong. It's just like a different approach to it. All right, are we getting Sorin Rippered? No, we are just getting Sorin pressure you a little bitted, which is nowhere near as scary. It also lets us remove the Sorin before they can get the Ripper out, so we're feeling extra safe there.
Yes.
And noting that they named Phyrexian with their Cavern, which makes me think they have a Sheoldred in hand.
Yes.
Because normally this deck just names Vampire. It makes me think they have Sheoldred and not another black source.
Do they have Sheoldred?
Seems pretty good for us.
Do they have Sheoldred in their list? I don't remember seeing it. Can you?
Do they actually? Wait. No. Sorry, it's not Sheoldred. I was thinking of the previous list, but it is the Archfiend. The
Archfiend,
which is a Phyrexian. So, yeah. So, okay, no Sheoldred in hand, but Archfiend in hand, very likely. So that's worth noting. Although, our triple binding is perfect in this scenario. We can binding Sorin, we can binding Archfiend, and then eventually, when we're ready to cast a Garuda, we can binding the Cage. So, we've got a really well positioned hand. So, we get hit for 2. Draw a Carno. I'm starting to be a little bit worried about hitting land drops, but there's not really any decisions that makes us do differently. Here, I think pretty obvious line is you're just playing your Overgrown Tomb tap so that we don't have to take damage from it in the future. You're only doing one thing this turn, which is leylining something, probably the Sorin, probably main phase. And then next turn, you're planning on leyline plus buy Karuga. That would be my line. So I think I go Tomb tap, main phase binding the Sorin just in case you draw your Vein Ripper, and continue just delaying them and hoping to draw more lands. Is that what you would go with?
I agree with that line completely. Put the Tomb tapped so we don't get hurt. Leyline the Sorin away. We could do it on the upkeep if we wanted, but
I don't think there's significant upside to doing that, but it's basically equivalent. We're just letting them untap versus not. So I like main phase.
All right.
So that's exactly what we do. looks like they drew a Blood Crypt. That would be my guess.
And we should be
We get
seeing the
attack for
Archfiend
2.
here, right? Archfiend makes sense. No Archfiend.
No Archfiend. All right. Maybe that was a little bluff by them. I could see that. So they play out Fable. Fable's a really good card. It makes a threat and digs them to stuff. So that's probably better for them to play than Archfiend in this scenario. Like, worse for us, better for them. And yeah, we're going to our turn. Okay, draw a tap land. Makes things kind of interesting. What are your thoughts on this turn?
Well, I'm thinking tap land by Karuga, play it next turn is a possibility, but we're starting to fall a bit behind. Playing Mountain allows us to keep Carnosaur up and binding, or buy Karuga and keep one binding, but then we have a tap land in hand. It's hard to say which one is a better, because if we play tap land now and then we top the Quint next turn, we will be sad that we don't play a tap land now.
Right.
There's that, but playing a tap land now does mean we only have one interaction up.
This is a very tough turn because
it's really
there's
hard
a
decision.
high cost to playing really, really hard. This is like the quintessential difficult Quint turn, I think, because there's a really high cost to playing your tap land this turn, but there's a potentially even higher cost to not playing it and needing to play it down the line. I think my line this turn, and it's close. It's really close. Here's a couple things I'm considering. I'm considering tap land, binding the Saga, not the Goblin token, not the Duskweed and Zealot, but just the Saga. I'm considering untap land, binding Saga, Carnosaur your Goblin token. That takes them off of Vein Ripper Slam next turn. It keeps as much pressure off of us as possible, and then the following turn, it lets us play tap land, play binding, and buy Karuga. Then we've got 5 lands in play. The following turn, we can top deck a Quint, or we can top deck a land to play our Garuda. Or we can just, if we don't do that, slam Karuga, try to delay more, draw into our untapped lands, or a Quint, or whatever. The more I'm talking about that line, actually, the better it sounds to me. It's basically trying to keep as much pressure off of us as possible, knowing that if we're not under pressure and the longer the game goes, the more likely we are to draw the stuff we need and get set up well. And I think the cost of keeping the untapped land in your hand instead of deploying it this turn, but also being able to take them off of a Vein Ripper next turn and get rid of the Saga that will be digging them to more interaction or more threats, and getting rid of mediocre cards in their hand.
Yep.
I think that buys us more time than getting the untapped land out would. Now, the downside is that we lose the Carnosaur, and our Garudas are not great into this board with a Grafdigger's Cage. So it really does require some faith that we'll either draw more threats or the ability to binding Grafdigger's Cage so that we're not under pressure. But it's essentially saying I'm going to default to extending the game as much as I can, and then trusting my deck that in this matchup, if I extend the game, I will eventually win the game. So anyway, I was talking through it, and I sort of talked myself into that line. Do you have a different one that you see? Because again, this is a really, really complicated card.
Yeah. So I want to say tap land and buy Karuga. I don't like that at all. I want to interact with my opponent this turn.
Agree. Worth thinking about, but I think that's the first line we discuss.
Discard. And then I want to kill that Goblin Shaman, because I don't want them to slam a Ripper on 6 on next turn, if I can avoid it. So the question is, do I channel the Carno, or do I use a binding? I think I like Mountain by Karuga and binding the Shaman, and I don't mind that they discard and dig towards more things, because then the next turn I can play tap land and keep both binding and Carno up. So 2 pieces of interaction if we don't draw another tap land. And Karuga is going to draw us a lot of cards with so many bindings on board too. So we should be able to get into more threats. So right now I think mounting by Karuga and binding the shaman is my line. But I could also see tap land and hold up a binding or a Carnosaur, but not by Karuga if I put the tap land there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super reasonable. I think I still prefer my line because I do really value, and we talked about this in the previous video, I do really value getting the Fable off of the board without letting them dig. It'll be a relevant threat later, and that loot ability or the rummage ability is more valuable to them than you can really see from your seat as the Quint player.
Yep.
But I think your line makes sense for sure. Getting Karuga in our hand is pretty important here because it's going to draw us quite a few cards at some point and keep pressure off of us with this Dusk Legion Zealot, Mutavault on the ground as well. The reason I like my line is that I think next turn you have a very easy scripted sequence of play your tap land regardless of what you draw, buy Karuga, and leave up binding. And so that sort of fits the buying of Karuga in without us having to do it this turn. And I think that is enough for me to trust that I can get away with not buying it and instead try to keep more pressure off of us by dealing with two things this turn.
Yeah.
Even if it uses Arcano. But they're close. I think we both landed on the same category of thing, which is first priority, get rid of Shaman, and then think about how we're going to get our Karuga into our hand and able to cast in 2 turns while interacting next turn as well. That's really the important thing that you want to accomplish here. And both of our lines do that. It's just a question of, do you want to buy Karuga this turn or do you want to buy it next turn? And do you want to interact once this turn or do you want to interact twice this turn and possibly 1 or 0 times next turn instead of 2?
Yep.
So yeah, really, really close call. I'm super curious to figure out what you did here because I don't know if anyone could see, but I took a screenshot of this because I'm probably going to tweet this and ask what people think the play is because this is like truly, I think, captures all of the possible things you need to balance when playing this Quint deck, especially in this matchup. It's a really, really interesting and beautiful, I would say, decision.
Let's just move on.
Let's
we could
see what
talk
you do.
the whole day about it, but
yeah. Okay, so we play the tap land. Interesting. And then we're passing. So we're letting the Fable go off. I assume we're planning on killing the Shaman. That would be my guess.
Yes.
But yeah, let's see what we do. So they actually... Oh no, yeah, they have the Fable go off. Let's see what they discard. Nothing. Interesting. So that indicates they've got a pretty good hand. They probably have like a Vein Ripper, probably some interaction. Like their hand is probably pretty loaded. So they go to combat. We let them do that. All right, Glasgow. I'm starting to get a little concerned about this. No,
this is a punt. I should have removed the Shaman before the attack. I don't know what happened. So, I don't know what happened, but this is a punt.
It's high pressure Magic. I understand. It's tough. So yeah, we agree this was a punt. We get hit down. We're just leaving interaction up. Okay, we don't see a Vein Ripper. We see a Sorin. And they're putting a counter.
I guess this is a punt on their side too?
Turn.
I don't know.
Yeah, it could be, depending on what they have. And we are binding the Sorin. Okay. So we survived the turn. I think we were dead to a lot of, or not dead, but like really vulnerable to a lot of things they could have had there. But they're leaving up interaction because they know we could have Quint. I think that's reasonable on their end. We're sort of scaring them, right? If they go tap out for Vein Ripper, we could just untap and slam Quint. And so that is a bit scary. That could have been scaring them off here from actually slamming it, which I could see. But yeah, we get that out of the way. We have the option next turn to Carno plus binding and just continue interacting and then eventually slam a Garuda if we're targeting the cage with the binding. We're in an okay spot here, but it's a little sketchy. I do think the other line still would have put us in a better position no matter what they did that turn.
I'm quite embarrassed to not have removed the Shaman. Getting exposed to Vein Ripper like that, it was not good.
Although honestly, like it is relevant for us to think about, like from the opponent's point of view, even if you have the Ripper, do you play it there? It's pretty high risk for them to do so, given that they haven't seen our hand yet. The fact that they didn't discard anything to Fable is really interesting because, like, I would want a Thoughtseize quite a bit here if I were an opponent. So it really, I think they're saying that they have like multiple interaction pieces or like a Vein Ripper and interaction piece or something like that. The Sorin, I could easily see them having discarded or even. Oh, you know what? Sorry, I'm wrong. They don't have a Vein Ripper, right? Because if they did, they had the Sorin and they could have put it in play.
Yes.
So they don't have a Vein Ripper. I'm wrong about that. But it's worth considering if they did have it and didn't have the Sorin, do they slam it even?
I think they have a better triumphant hand, quite clear to see.
That I'm quite confident about. I'm not sure about the second card. Do you have any guesses?
They could be 2 bitter triumphs for all we know.
Totally could be.
And I understand maybe that they didn't bin the Sorin because they thought like they can put pressure to us with the Sorin and kill us. And so they didn't bin it. They have a Mutavault also that they can sack, Lightning Helix our face. So it is baffling, as you have been explaining, like why didn't they bin anything? But I'm pretty sure they have a better triumphant hand. And I think they decided that Sorin was a good enough threat to keep and not discard.
Put us under enough pressure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they did. I don't understand why they didn't play and plus the Dust Legion Zealot the first time. Maybe they didn't want to expose the Zealot to a binding, but in any case, we would still like binding the Sorin. So I don't know.
Or the Goblin. Like I think I'm happy taking 3 from the Zealot, especially because they still have a Mutavault to sack. So yeah. Confusing place from both of you, I guess. we're in a difficult tournament. This is a really difficult match, and so I think you're both just kind of trying to play your way through it as best you can, and not playing perfectly, but playing well enough to like advance your board plan, your board state, and your plan. Okay, so we draw a Consecrate Consume. Not great here. Kind of meant to deal with Vein Ripper. Doesn't, I think, change our line very much. So what are we trying to do this turn? I think we're trying to get Karuga in hand. We're probably binding something. Maybe the Cage if we want to unlock our Garudas, but we would only do that if we're using the Carno to kill something, and I don't know if we're doing that because kind of want to use that as our threat. Yeah, this one's interesting. The Consecrate Consume also can cycle to a land, which would be really relevant because even if it's a tap land, if we do that first, we can get the tap land out and know that we're slamming a 6-drop next turn. So if I can fit this in this turn, it might want to be the first spell I cast. This is another very complicated turn.
Yep.
Yeah, where are you at with it?
Well, I think consecrating and cycling might be correct from what you're explaining. To see if we get an untapped land. I think I'm in the tournament at least. I was happy to have insurance against a Vein Ripper with a Consume. So that's relevant to say.
That makes sense.
Like if they put and they have a better Triumph in hand, right? So that is a read they can do. So they can top deck a Vein Ripper and then it doesn't matter. We're still in the game. I like trying to get to buy Karuga because we can then have 3 Leyline Bindings next turn and draw 3 cards, and that puts us in a really good spot.
Quite good in this game, yeah. Like, I want Karuga in our hand for sure.
And we need to be careful because they have a Mutavault. They can animate that next turn and put us into, like, almost the brink of death, right? So I'm eyeing the Cage. I want to unlock the Gyrudas, but we might not have the luxury because there's quite a lot of pressure.
You might just need to rely on the Carnosaur to get you there.
Yep. So I think here I like buying Karuga and having that option next turn and then Leyline Binding on.
And that pretty much leaves us with binding, right?
Yeah.
And so then the question becomes, what are we binding to keep the most pressure off of us next turn?
And that depends if they animate the Mutavault or not. If they don't animate the Mutavault, maybe I hold the binding and take 5. But if they animate the Mutavault, I'm not taking 7. I'm taking away the Dust Legion Zealot out of there.
Because that's a fundamentally different clock, which is quite important.
Yep. So I think that's what I do. I buy Karuga and I hold
Leave out
binding.
Yep. This also does let us Not binding if they don't, attack, and then maybe just cycle the Consecrate Consume and try to go off with Carno if they're like tapping out for a Vein Ripper
Yes.
or something.
Although Carno here would probably not win the game since they should have a Bitter Triumph in hand, but just
Yeah, if I guess they won't have to tap out for a Vein Ripper probably, and so they could still leave up the Triumph anyway.
But if they don't animate Mutavault, I can go like Leyline Binding, Grafdigger's Cage, and like we're not super dead yet. But if they animate the Mutavault, I don't want to take 7. That's what I'm getting at.
Yep. So we're in a tough spot here, but definitely not out of it. Okay, so we've got a land. It's another Mutavault, relevant threat, and lets them play a Ripper with Bitter Triumph backup. Although we had sort of done the analysis that they probably didn't have Ripper last turn. Although you were still worried about it, which makes sense. Like I don't know if I would have read that live in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So they think about animating their Mutavault, but they don't, and they just go to combat and attack us for 5. And we are binding here. I think I actually do like that because I just want to go to 10 instead of 7. 7 means we are very likely dead next turn, whereas 10 means we could maybe even slam a Karuga, draw a bunch of cards, and survive. So I like the binding there for sure.
And a lot of talking about like, oh, maybe I go for the cage if they don't attack with Mutavault and stuff. Still, I think when I see that the creature's attacking me, I'm like, I don't want to get so low.
I do think that's correct here for what it's worth. Like, I think you really just want to keep pressure off of yourself because this Karuga is going to be really good unless they have like a Vein Ripper, in which case you're probably just dead. But
I think also what tipped me over the edge is that there's a second Mutavault. So like if I'm at 10, if I'm at 10, I'm not dead next turn.
That means at 7 you're probably dead.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
All right, so we go to 10, and they've got an Archfiend. So this one, it's better than a Ripper because we can consume it, but that means we're not playing our Karuga, and we're not really drawing into more lands or anything. So I would say we're not looking good here, assuming they have the Bitter Triumph. If they don't, then could be a totally different story. Mm-hmm. We might just top deck a land and kill them. But
I mean, consuming the Archfiend is good. Because it gives us more life.
It's good. So. Yeah, it does keep pressure off for sure. And it doesn't drain us like a Ripper would, so it actually is more life. So yeah, like we're not horrible spot because we have that consume, and that's what we do, which I like. So yeah, 16, having killed the 3/3, not 13, which would even still be a slightly scary life total. We'd be dead in like 2 turns there. I think keeping the pressure off has really rewarded us this game.
I agree.
And yeah, now we don't really have any decisions. We just let them pressure us as much as they can. There they go. And they leave Kiki back, which is kind of interesting.
I think.
Why do you think they did that?
I think they want to like do it end step and have more threats next turn to kill us.
Yeah.
I don't think that changes the math, but
no. It does mean that like they're fine. They don't have anything to use like 4 mana on, or I guess 5 mana because they have the treasure. But this deck usually doesn't, and yeah, it is I think equivalent in the clock at least. So
and it's also like
defensible. I don't think it really signals anything.
If they go for like tap Kiki end of my turn, I can target I can target whatever they're targeting, and then they don't get the clone. So I think it's strictly better to just get in with Kiki also, but well,
yeah, maybe a mistake, but a very minor one by the opponent. All right, well, we draw our untap land. So are we slamming Carno here? Are we just trying to draw a bunch of cards with Karuga because we think they have Bitter Triumph? Yeah, interesting spot. I don't know what I'm doing. I think it's probably Carno, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that cage is the bane of my existence at this point because I would slam Garuda here easily without that cage.
Yeah,
right?
Garuda is like, this is the spot for Garuda because you want to be resilient to removal, and you're playing against a Vein Ripper deck, but the cage really prevents that. So that it's doing its work out of the board for sure.
Yeah. So let's say we play Karuga and they Bitter Triumph the Karuga, and then they create another token. We're dead next turn. because they animated 2 Mutavolts. They have 6 power on board, plus the 2 Mutavolts, 10. We're dead. So Keruga is a losing play with a Bitter Triumph in hand. So,
assuming we don't draw our last leyline binding.
Assuming we don't draw our last leyline binding.
Which is pretty unlikely.
Unlikely.
So doing that specific math is super critical. And yeah, that's like absolutely the thing that you should do is like, if we play Keruga, are we dead to the binding anyway? And it seems like we are.
Yes.
So yeah, good evaluation.
Knowing that we're dead to Bitter Triumph on Keruga, most likely, unless we draw the last binding, which is very unlikely, that just tells me like, okay, we can only slant Carno and pray. So that reduces the decisions to that, and I'm pretty sure that's what I did.
Yeah, and they don't even know if they had it because we hit a Quint first, which is great. So this, if anyone doesn't know, we've probably explained it before, but you get a Quint. Sure, they could Bitter Triumph the Carno. Okay, what happens if that happens? You Quint, you -4, get a Spark Double, copy Quint, train is rolling. Okay, they Bitter Triumph the Quint. Great. We will copy our Carno. We will clone that and eventually find another Quint and keep going off. Even if we don't get you for the full lethal, we've made a huge board of dinos and you can't kill us, and then we're going to kill you on the crackback. So hitting a Quint basically means that you can beat at least one removal spell, even through that. So yeah, great, very lucky, and good that we hit Quint there.
Yep.
And it means that we likely win.
We high rolled and we just win. They had the blot out.
Yep.
So
they had their interaction, but it doesn't end up mattering. There we go.
And they win.
Love it.
So last game, we top decked the Quint. We won that game, which we're pretty much dead the next turn. And this game, if we discover a clone instead of Quint, we also lose. So
we have top decked that cavern, right?
Yep. Or we hadn't top decked that cavern. So this match, I got extremely lucky. Which, hey, it compensates a bit the bad luck that I had in previous matches. And we take those, of course. But just putting out that the same way that we won this match by super tight and slim margins, it's also how we also lost the previous matches too. So I like that this deck put me in spots to win games, even if those margins are so tight. And I think we did a very good job at keeping pressure off the board in this match. And we were rewarded with a lot of luck. I am sure this was the match where I got the luckiest in the whole tournament.
Yeah, I think that I would probably agree with for sure. You had a great opening hand, and still needed to top deck and discover into the right thing to win. But hey, that's why you play the deck. Sometimes that will happen. And you win the other matches by tight play where it's close and you attack with your Tanukis for the win or whatever you need to do, or do the correct math on which threat, Garuda or Carno, to play and get there. But sometimes you get the nut draw, and that's great. We'll take those.
2 more things. So once again, pointing out that playing Keruga there was losing. They had the blot out. We would have lost that game. So we had to play the Carno and pray that we would discover Quint. We did. We were rewarded.
And I will say, that is a scenario where if you are going to 2 instead of 0 by playing the Keruga, it is probably correct to play the Garuda.
Yes.
Because you're drawing so many more cards. You could hit a binding, you could hit more threats, you could hit a Quint, whatever. And that is the particular scenario where you do the math. You figure out, am I dead to X particular thing, or am I dead to something already on the board? And yeah, it's a huge factor. So sometimes identifying the case where you just need to evaluate the whole board and everything they could possibly have is right. And I'm really glad and proud that you did that there, because you slamming the Carno is scary, but it was correct, and you did it.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that cage was the bane of our existence in that game, because otherwise a Garuda there would have been correct, I think. It's safer, can mill a Vein Ripper, can mill a Carno.
And making 2 creatures, I believe, lets you survive.
Yes, I mean, if we whip with the Garuda and they have the blot out, yes, we lose regardless. But I think it's better than trying to throw dice with Carno, because if Carno discovers a clone, we also lose on the spot, right? So interesting that we had 3 leyline bindings in hand. there was a cage, and we were eyeing the cage the whole game, but they had worse threats that we had to deal with, and that left our Gyrudas looking pretty bad. And that's also what led me to tell you during the tournament when you were in the semifinals, I believe, that you were like, hey, they have Grafdigger's cage in the sideboard. Should I cut maybe some Gyrudas? And I think that's correct. I think cutting 2 Gyrudas when they side in 2 cages is probably correct, because you can't afford to draw too many Gyrudas and they have a cage on board. It's just game losing.
That makes a lot of sense. And is an example where you actively learning from all of your matches throughout the tournament and just thinking about like the takeaways from them ended up actively helping me out in the top 8, which is just like great teammate, great teamwork, and an example of always got to be thinking and figuring out the lessons to learn from your games of Magic.
Yep. We will jump now into round 9. And fortunately, 17 Lands is cooperating with me today, and we can do it from my screen. But this is the last round of the Swiss part of the tournament. So it was 3 rounds of draft and 6 rounds of Explorer. And just a small recap, at this point I was 5-3. Yeah, 5-3. And so were you, Ryan, and so was Lord Tapour Ethan. We all 3 Quints, we just were one win away from the top 8, and we were also hoping that we would not face each other, although that would guarantee a Quint into the top 8. But yeah, it was an exciting round for sure. I don't know if you had any thoughts on.
I'm really surprised that none of us ended up playing each other at all, because we had similar records for a lot of the tournament. But yeah, this last round especially, we all had exactly the same record, hadn't played each other yet, and somehow got matched up against different opponents. I got matched up against Brett Shears on red-green vehicles, and that was a really good matchup for me. So I think I got pretty lucky with the pairing. And yeah, you faced Toni, who I faced in the finals, and yeah, a little bit less lucky, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, and I was happy that I was featured in this match. In the AC4, I wasn't featured for anything, and I also missed my opportunity to be featured in round 4 against that Amalia opponent because of my laptop problems. So I was happy that I was featured in this last match, and just an opportunity to brag with people like, hey, I've appeared in MTG TV, and stuff. But yeah, that will be a match near and dear to my heart that I will keep, and I'm also going to re-upload it to the YouTube channel, because in Twitch, after 2 weeks, I believe the videos disappear. So I will want to keep it there for posterity's sake.
Yeah. I got lucky enough. I was featured a ton. I kept losing on the feature match, and they kept bringing me back to try to get me to win with the fun Quint deck on camera. And I've already uploaded all of those to my YouTube channel as well. So yeah, if anyone wants to go check them out.
But
some of them are really good.
Yeah, you lost all the time during the Swiss, but when it was time to shine, you shone.
Yeah. Well, up until the finals match, although I really do think that finals match, like, I played really well, and I think it was just excellent Magic. So like that honestly felt like the accumulation. I don't know if that's an appropriate word to use there, but that was some good Magic TV for sure. Even though I lost, I think that was like my favorite match of the whole tournament. And so now we're going to get to see you face off against the same list.
Yes, the same list, and anyone who's probably watched the finals will know Toni's list also, but let's just go over it. Of course, we faced his testing teammate Bernardo Torres in a previous round, and here we can see if it's exactly the same list or not, and it does look like the exact same list. Here's one Ashiok main and one Prismari Command main, and I do believe the sideboard is also identical. But yeah, we probably already talked about this deck in the previous round. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to say right now about it.
Yeah, no, just the big takeaway is that there's no Torch the Tower in the main for game 1, although there is a Prismari command which can kill Quint, but most of the burn spells are pretty dead unless they're like double killing a Carnosaur or a Garuda. Doubling up, to kill one of those. The things we have to worry about, the Singleton Jawari disruption can get us if we're not careful. I believe there's 2 spell pierces.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. So those are relevant for sure. The command, and then the Ashiok can turn off our rampers, but Usually has to be getting under them, and it's kind of hard for Toni to do that. So not super concerned. There is an Otawara, which Toni actually did use against me in the
Oh,
finals.
okay.
It kind of got me by surprise. So that's important to know. Most Phoenix lists didn't cap them, but just relevant. And then the matchup changes significantly, as I think people saw if they watched the finals post board. You get, as the Phoenix player, a lot more interaction, and you get to cut all your burn. So the three mystical disputes, the negate, the Aether Gust, both all of those give like a different dimension for countering stuff. Aether Gust plays around a cavern. Brazen Borrower can bounce things in response to us trying to combo off, so that's a very, very good card. It can also pressure us. There's a Young Pyromancer, which is another relevant 2-drop threat. There's some Crackling Drakes if you want to bring those in to sort of, hedge and get your threats a little bit more graveyard resilient. So there's a lot Toni can do post board. But game one, we don't have to worry about that many things to play around. And so they either need to kill us quickly, or we usually get there because we can get up to 7 mana and play around a Spell Pierce or something like that.
Yeah. So basically, favorite game one for us, as long as we get enough threat density and we don't die to a nut draw from Phoenixes. And then like a more complicated game 2 and game 3, since they have more disruption for a combo.
Yeah. I ended up losing, I believe, like 4 out of the 5 game 2 and 3s, the post board games we played in the finals. But I don't think the matchup is that bad for us. I think it's more like a 40% maybe post board and maybe like 60 pre-board. So yeah, it's a very, very, very tight matchup, I think.
Yeah, the matchup feels quite 50%, and we tested in-house against Phoenix quite a bit. We thought it would be more a bigger part of the field. It is true that the lists were a bit different. We even tried the Prophecy Dietic Memory, right? Whereas they had a more counterspell version. But yeah, we've analyzed that list quite a bit before. I think we just jump into the games. So first game, we are on the play, and we have this hand against Phoenix.
Yeah, great hand. You got a ramper, you got a threat, you've got good mana.
2 threats.
I'm keeping this. 2 threats, exactly. And one of them can be disruption if we really need it.
Yep.
And yeah, like Spark Double, sure, kind of irrelevant, but like this is a perfect 6-carder, so there's no reason to mulligan.
Yes, and we're even on the play, so we keep. And the opponent does mulligan, by the way, so they're starting on 6.
Yep. Phoenix tends to mulligan, we think, pretty aggressively in this matchup to have a turn 2 Ledger Shredder, just because that's like the most relevant threat they can have. And if we're not under pressure, it's a completely different sort of game, especially game 1. So yeah, I'm expecting Toni to mulligan to 5 at least if he can't find a Ledger Shredder, probably. So keeping 6 means I would expect a Shredder on turn 2, probably.
Lead with Garden, so that if we draw a Binding, we can play Triumph and Binding. So we do that.
Gotta have that in the muscle memory with this deck.
Untap Steam Vents and nothing. So maybe a Consider, most likely. End of turn.
Yeah, it can't really be a Spell Pierce because there's no reason to leave him Pierce, so it's likely a cantrip.
Draw another Jetmir's Garden. Kind of scripted to play the Triumph now. The Sagoth Triumph.
Yep. And maybe hold control if we're trying to be try hard, which it is the winning in, so maybe we do.
I believe I did do that. I mean, on camera you can see me putting like the stops to fake a Leyland Binding. But that is indeed a Consider, and kept on top. So must be a good one. I believe, if I remember correctly, Toni had like 1 lander hand over here, which is always a risk with Phoenix, but it was not a case in this matchup. Like there.
Yeah, and you have to keep those as Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's the Shredder.
There's the Shredder.
So now that I untap, I think it's quite clear I don't have the Binding, but hey, it was good to at least fake having it over there.
Right. So yeah, interesting spot here. I faced a similar decision in the finals. Where do you get the Shredder off the board, keep the pressure off of yourself immediately, or do you continue ramping? I don't know. Where are you at with that currently?
So that's a good. I'm pretty sure I thought about this should I kill the Shredder or should I ramp? And if I kill the Shredder, we have to do it now so that they don't connive and get value out of the Shredder.
Yep.
My instinct is to ramp because we have already 3 threats in hand, and there's not a lot of interaction from Phoenix game 1. So that's my inclination. I want to ramp, and I want to try to slam threats as fast as possible. And I don't think, since I'm also on the play, probably I'm not going to die that fast to Phoenix. So that's my
I think
instinct.
if you can reach a game state where you have a ton of lands in play and threats in your hand, and it's game 1 specifically against Phoenix, it is really hard for you to lose. So I get the instinct to ramp for sure. I think specifically with this hand, I may actually want to kill the Shredder because it doesn't change my ramping clock to Quint. Since I have this tap land in hand, I'm not going to be able to Quint next turn unless I draw an untapped land, which is a possibility for sure. But I'm going to assume I'm not drawing that. And in that case, if I can Carno to keep the pressure still completely off of myself, make sure they can't bin any Phoenixes they have in hand, make sure they can't dig to their Spell Pierces or their extra answers, and still have basically the same clock in terms of getting to 5 and probably still the same clock in terms of getting to 6 even. I think using the Carno, even though it's a duplicate threat that we might want to use, drawing the Garuda makes it more likely I make this play because we have an additional threat even if they have the 2 of Spell Pierce for our Quint. We'll eventually be able to slam Garuda. It's not using a land to kill the thing, it's using a threat, which we have enough of this game. I think it is correct to kill the Shredder here instead of ramping with the specific hand that you have with a tap land and an extra threat in Garuda.
Yeah,
that's my logic.
Very respectable. I'm still not 100% sure I agree with that. There's also,
I'm not 100% sure of it. Like, definitely it's a tough call, and like getting your lands out is the main thing you want to do in this matchup, and then the secondary thing is keeping pressure off of yourself and making them not be able to shape a hand. It's very close. I do think I'm pretty confident with the Carno, but it's like a 70-80% confidence, not 100% for sure. As rarely you'd have in Magic, 100% confidence in a certain difficult decision.
I also want to make a case for ramping right now, and that is
go for it.
That is if we ramp, Phoenix has to keep up a Spell Pierce because we are threatening ramp, untap land, Quint the next turn. So next turn they can have 3 mana, but they're not going to be able to get a Phoenix out in play without exposing themselves to getting comboed and killed, right? So that's also why I thought, like, okay, the Shredder is not that much of a threat right now, especially since I'm on the play, and I want to have the threat for Quint on turn 5. So that's why that's my instinct too. Like, okay, the worst that they can do next turn is also not that bad, but I think it's also completely respectable to just eliminate the Shredder and keep them off balance in a way.
Yeah, I think I would counter that Spell Pierce with the fact that even if they would be dead if they don't leave up Spell Pierce, I don't think they actually can afford to leave up Spell Pierce if they have an option to develop their board. And so I think Toni, being a good player, will understand he needs to put you under pressure in this matchup. And so even if he knows he's dead to a untapped land plus Quint, I think he won't actually play around that because he knows that he will lose to that eventually anyway, and he'll continue developing his board, even if you make the ramp play. So that's one contention. And then the other one is just that I agree they can't do something that scary to you next turn with the Shredder in play. The worst they could do, which is pretty bad, is if they have like cantrip, discarding a Phoenix, which puts you under like 5, being attacked for 5 next turn, which is pretty bad, but that also completely opens you up to draw an untapped land and slam Quint and just win the game outright. So, I think that's possible. So there is like a slightly more threatening line. I think the answer for why you kill the Shredder now is you're not killing it on future turns, and it doesn't actually cost you a significant amount of tempo towards your late game to do it this turn because of the tap land. Um, but yeah, like it is close. Some games, you, especially game one, you kind of just try to ignore their threats and race them, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
you were trying to do here. I assume if you did ramp, and it's defensible. It's a strategy that I've done multiple times before. It really depends on the game.
Would you ramp if you had an untapped land in hand?
Yeah, I think I probably would. Or if I hadn't drawn the Garuda, it's also possible that I ramp because then I can just play Quint. Sure, if it gets spell pierced, great. But then I slam Carno, and there really aren't very many ways, if at all, that they can answer Carno. They'd have to have like pierce into burn or something. And if they have those, they're not putting us under more pressure. So it really is like a very particular
Mm-hmm.
situation here with drawing the Garuda, having the tapped land instead of an untapped land, um, and just like, yeah, generally the turn two shredder is the best way they can pressure you. And so if you can just negate that completely, I think it puts you much more favored in like a slightly longer game.
Mm-hmm. I think you convinced me that it is correct to kill the shredder over here, given that we have two threats and given that we don't have the untapped land to guarantee a Quint on 5. But hey, that's why I asked those questions too. It's like, if you had an
Right.
untapped
And we just spent
land.
10 minutes talking about it. We just spent 10 minutes talking about it. It was like a hair decision based on the specific cards in our hand, and you had 20 seconds to make this
Yeah.
decision in one of the highest stakes match of your life. So it's very difficult. Magic is hard.
I did keep the ramp, so pass the turn. So one consider there, and we see Treasure Cruise binned. So if the Treasure Cruise gets binned, that most likely indicates that they're looking for lands, right? You wouldn't normally bin a
Yep.
treasure cruise.
Or if there's like no pick lock in hand, I could see
Mm,
binning the cruise just because you don't have a realistic way to fill up your yard a ton. But yeah, it tells us for sure something about Tony's hand that he's spinning
hmm
Treasure Cruise.
Then there's an opt. There's a connive, which discards a phoenix. So
Yeah, there
that
you
is to be
go.
expected. Scry to the bottom and draw and play a storm card coast. And do they go for it? Do they like play a third
Yeah,
spell?
here's the moment of truth.
And the answer
Yeah,
is
it
no.
doesn't go for it.
So keeping the spell pierce up because I'm threatening ramping into Quint makes a lot of sense. So I
Yeah.
I
Also possible that Tony just doesn't have a cantrip. I don't remember.
also
I don't
mhm,
know based on watching in the finals or in the streamed match, but yeah, could just be he doesn't have the spell, or could be that he just really doesn't want to die to the Quint.
mhm. We ramp and we fetch mountain or plains, one of the two, something that guarantees us
Mm-hmm.
to play Quint if we wanted to next turn. So there it is. I get the mountain. And the draw is an impersonator.
Interesting. So here we've got a couple options. We can't kill the Shredder anymore, but we can play the impersonator on it. That could get burned because we would only cast one spell. They would only cast one spell. So Fiery Impulse gets it. That unlocks a dead card in their hand and fills their yard a little bit more for Treasure Cruise, which is a significant downside.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we could just buy Karuga, be a little bit more conservative about it. We are under pressure in the air, so I think it's doubtful that Karuga is going to do a lot of work this game, especially because we don't have a leyline binding.
Mm-hmm.
Or we could just pass and try to not let them use their burn spell on the impersonator, which I think is a pretty valid line. Um, at the end of it, I think if Tony had a burn spell, there's a non-zero chance that he's burning his ledger shredder to get back the phoenix and put us under more pressure last turn,
Mm-hmm.
and just accept that he's dead to a turn 4 Quint. So that makes me go like one tick down on the possibility of him having burn in hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's not impossible for sure, but a little bit less likely given that he didn't play a 1 mana spell that he could have last turn. And generally, like, my instinct is to just do things to try to get in the way and clog up the board and delay the pressure. against Phoenix. And so I think I'm trying to cast the Impersonator here, play my tapped land, and then next turn, if we draw an untapped land, we could go for one of the Spell Pierce proof threats. And if we don't, we can just go for the Quint and force Toni to have the Pierce. And kind of whatever Toni does to pressure us, he burns the copied Shredder, gets back Phoenix, attacks us for a bunch, maybe discards another Phoenix, whatever. That's all fine, and we'll have like a significant chance to win the game the following turn if he does that. So I think I'm playing the Impersonator, but I could easily also see passing. I don't think that's a terrible option. You're sort of just putting yourself under like more average amount of pressure instead of the possible slightly increased pressure if they have the burn spell for your Impersonator. It's a close call. I don't think it's super like deterministic of who's going to win the game, but that's where I lean. How about you?
Well, just pointing out, there's a Phoenix in the yard. Next turn, there could be 2 Phoenixes in the yard after a connive. So we would be under quite a lot of pressure. I want to believe that Toni has a Spell Pierce in hand, because otherwise he would have probably tried to get the Phoenix on board and attack. But what you say, there's 8 burn spells that Toni could have that are just going to deal with the
Although there's only 4 that he could have really cast last turn to get back the Phoenix.
Yes.
So those fiery impulses are really the only ones that really punish us, or at least, are the indicator that he might have one.
Would it make sense to Lava Axe your Shredder to pitch a second Phoenix and then return 2 Phoenixes and get in? I don't think that would make sense, right? I don't think
so. I think he really wants to keep the Shredder. Yeah. So totally could have a Lightning Axe, in which case that could, be a downside, casting Impersonator, and that's a real risk. It's a close call. It really just is. I think the question is which makes it more likely that we will survive over multiple turns. And I honestly don't know. I think it's really, really close.
We could definitely just play the land and Carno the Phoenix that's going to come next turn. That's also a possibility.
True. Yeah, that's also another way to delay slightly. And then we slam Quint, or we'll have a Garuda.
Yep.
Just a bit less deterministic, but still fine.
I don't like getting Karuga this turn. I like either the Impersonator or the Carnosaur on the Phoenix the next turn.
Yeah. I think my line, and this is more a personal preference thing, is no fear, make him have it. Jam, as Ethan says, for this deck is the strategy. I'm just going to play the Impersonator, start getting spells out of my hand, and force the opponent to interact. That's my default, but I don't think you go significantly wrong either way.
Another argument for playing Impersonator is that it's not doing anything else in your hand at this point.
Right.
So
it's never going to affect the game beyond this. It's just a question of whether it will be a positive or a negative impact. That's really what we're trying to decide.
Yes. Like, unlocking burn spells is a consideration for sure, for putting spells in yard to resurrect the Phoenix. Of course, if I play Impersonator and they burn it immediately, that's one spell that they're not using next turn, right? So that's also, they can maybe burn their mana now, so to say.
It does fill their yard for crews as well, so that's notable. There's a lot of factors.
I did go with the Impersonator, and this is, by the way, a play that we play tested quite a bit in our internal testing team, that sometimes games against Phoenix can be just like clones on Shredders, and then you put a lot of Shredders and clones onto them, and they can be quite annoying for the Phoenix player.
Shredder is a very, very good card in the Phoenix Mirror, and we can do a shitty job of, impersonating it. It's much less good because we, as a deck, don't have the ability to cast multiple spells a turn, but it's a really good flying blocker and can delay them if they don't have a way to get rid of it.
Yep. So I played it, and we go to the next turn. So no burning end of turn.
Yet. No end of turn.
So draw, play an island, and Prankster. So this tells us that there's no burn spell in hand, because if there were, they're definitely killing the Shredder before a connive. So this is important.
Yes. Yeah.
It's very important to note.
True. There's at least no fiery impulse.
Or even an axe, because you
an axe, because you don't want to let you lose. Yeah, you're right. So no burn in hand.
Prankster goes,
Oh, good catch.
mills Otawara Island, Cruise, and Slide of hand, and gets Treasure Cruise back. Then the Treasure Cruise for 1, so cast their Ancestral Recall, and then 2 Connives triggers go. Ours resolves first. We draw Giant, Beanstalk Giant. What do we discard here?
Get rid of that Spark Double. I don't think you're ever going to be copying your Shredder. A Giant can grab you a land, which can definitely be relevant if next turn you're trying to play around Spell Pierce, and so you Giant plus Carno. I think it's a pretty easy Spark Double. That's always the default, and it's worth thinking about a little bit because you do have a creature on the battlefield. But yeah, I think it's not too difficult to just get rid of the double.
They cast a Treasure Cruise. It's most likely that they're going to draw a burn spell at this point. Although, if it's an impulse, it doesn't kill the Shredder now. And I think that is important to notice.
Yeah, it narrows their available burn by half, which is quite relevant.
Yep. I know what I went for.
And I will note also, if they tap out on their turn, right, to get rid of your Shredder, you can untap and slam Quint into the game. So
yes,
really, you are assuming that they are not going to cast anything else and not get back their Phoenix and not whatever this turn, because they've hit their land drop and they've used 3 of their mana already.
Yep. I understand binning the Spark Double is usually a card that is kind of useless in hand. I understand that Beanstalk Giant is a land. And in the end, I went for binning the Giant, actually. So I binned the Giant.
Yeah, I can see why. It makes some amount of sense. Like, if you double the Shredder, you can really make a board that is super tough for them to deal with. So that's reasonable, I think.
I think I felt that Giant was a bit too slow at this stage of the game. And I have the possibility to Spark Double the next turn and copy my Shredder, since I didn't see any burn from them. But still, like, Giant, get a land, untap land, and then channel Carno. That sounds appealing to me. So I think binning the Spark Double and not the Giant is correct, all things considered. So I don't know why I chose to bin the Giant here. Just seeing this right now.
Probably because you had about 10 seconds to make the decision and it seemed intuitive, which is a reasonable way to make decisions, even in tournaments.
Yeah, I do feel the Giant is a bit slow here, but it does play around the Spell Pierce. Sure. It plays around the Spell Pierce and gets an untapped land, and then I have Carno up. But I guess I was just thinking like, okay, I can Spark Double the Shredder, and that's why I want to keep the Spark Double. Or even
which is like a really relevant play.
Yeah, or even like Spark Double a Garuda or a Carno down the line. So I don't know.
Yeah,
that's what I went for.
Yep.
So Toni bins Pathway and 3 fresh cards in hand, and no other spells. So, and no attacks either. So like, he could have gone for like an attack, and then if I block, like potentially like killing. But I mean, this to me tells me there is a Spell Pierce in hand. He doesn't.
Yes,
he doesn't want to die.
Very loud alarm for Spell Pierce for sure. Yep. A full grip and no 1-mana spell to cast, like, that's pretty unlikely. And so Toni is, I think, really just trying not to die here.
Although, to be fair, even getting back the Phoenix at this point, like, I have a 2/4, like, doesn't make sense either.
True.
But yeah. We draw a Herd Migration.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think the play is pretty simple here. We're assuming that the mana being left up is a Spell Pierce, and if it were an Axe, probably Toni would have killed your Shredder and gotten in for 5 and accepted that he was dead to Quint. Maybe he doesn't do that, but game 1, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me for Toni to be really planning on playing a long game, just because when we get enough lands in play, it's almost impossible for him to win. So I don't think he would have made that play. I think I'm just cycling Herd Migration, getting a land, making sure we have a 6-drop next turn, and playing a Spark Double, trying to copy the Shredder.
Yeah. Well, I will come back to that. I'm just gonna say, like, I remember being in this spot and thinking, man, an untapped land would have allowed me to play Giruda or Carno even. Would be nice to have that. And it was like, okay, I get a land, but I still need to wait one turn. So that I remember that annoyed me a bit, and it also annoyed me that there's still a spell pierce up, so I cannot just play Quint and win the game. I think I went easily for getting a land, so that's exactly what I did. Got a plains and played it, and then I agree with your line. Like, I should just play the Spark Double here, put another 2/4 in play. And
it's not doing anything else for you this game.
Yeah, it's not doing anything else. I think in the end I didn't do that because I was afraid of an axe on my shredder right now. But honestly, if that's the worst that happened, then there's just like the next
and
turn.
And you still have a 6-drop to play next turn.
Exactly.
You're fine.
Yeah. Exactly. And there was no burn before the treasure cruise last turn. I can assume there was a burn that was drawn. And if I play a Spark Double right now, sure, it could get killed, but it's not the end of the world. Like, yes, we spend our mana, and then Toni can resurrect some phoenixes or whatever. But then it's our turn next turn to play a Giruda or a Carnosaur. They could have the Disruption in hand, the Jawari Disruption, which would counter one of the 6-drops.
True.
But yeah, what I did is I didn't even put Keruga in hand. I just kept Carno open. I kept Carno open. I think it's a punt. It's a quite a big punt not to put the Spark Double over there, because with 2/4 in play, the game is very difficult for the Phoenix player at this point. Like the Phoenixes cannot get in. I'm going to be conniving also as well, and it's just like I have 3 threats in hand. They're just gonna fall at some point. So I'm really sad that I made this punt, but it was correct to Spark Double.
It stinks. I mean, these are learning opportunities, and this is why we go over these matches. I think I agree. Like, this is definitely one of the spots where you can make them have it, and then even if they do have it, they still need to have more, right? Mm-hmm. More, and like, they need to have an answer for your Shredder in response to the Spark Devil. Then they need to have a way to get back their Phoenixes, and then they need to have a way to disrupt you, which is just a lot. Now, if Toni has the perfect hand, great, like GG's, right? But I think you're right. I think this was a punt, and it's tough to hear that for like a win in, but Magic is hard. I keep saying it, and like there's nothing you can do but bravely face it and learn from it. That's all we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So now it's Toni's turn. Lightning Axe the Shredder, which I believe it was the top deck. So he didn't have any burn in hand, and he top decked the burn, which I can be a bit salty. Oh, of course, he top decks that without even me conniving. I don't even get value from that. But It's Phoenix. They're going to draw their cards eventually, right? And it's unlucky.
He's already dug very far, and
it's also unlucky for them that they haven't drawn any of the 8 burn spells they could have had before, right? But again, if I had the Spark Double now in play over there, what a difference that would have been. Because look what happens now. So there was no other Phoenix in hand, so that's important. But bidding that canal, play a land, adventure the Prankster. Connives away another Shredder, so get a 3/5. Mill, Slide, and 3 lands. So gets a Slide. Gets another
that
Slide.
Gets back Phoenix.
And now there's 1 Phoenix in the yard, and that comes back and leaves 1 mana open. So again, the spell pierce is up.
Yep.
Gets in for 6, and I don't even Carno away the Phoenix, which is probably correct. To be honest, too.
I don't think it's correct. No. I think you want to be playing Carno this next turn.
Okay.
Instead of Garuda. Now, Garuda, like, it could be better if you mill the Carno, right? But you only have 3 left in your deck. Carno might be worse if you immediately discover into a Quint and it gets spell pierced. But it's still more likely that you're going to discover into at least 1 clone, which I don't think Toni has a way to deal with. on the stack. So you'll make 2 Carnos, and then it's an actual race. Like your opponent's at 16, you're at 15, you're under 6 life total pressure. So you could genuinely race them with these Carnos, especially if you get to spark double one of them the following turn. And so I think the way that Carno loses if it immediately discovers into a Quint, which is totally possible, but less likely than not. And Garuda can easily whiff, especially in this matchup where you could mill their Phoenixes, then they can, burn them and then get them back on their side. You can mill like a Shredder, which doesn't do a whole lot. There's not much on their side you can mill. And on your side, if you're trying to mill clones, well, Carno is trying to hit those too, so it's sort of equivalent. I think it's correct to not Carno here, and I think you want to be playing Carno instead of Garuda next turn. That's my take.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think I just got carried away, and it's like, okay, I just burned my mana over here for no reason. I should have played the Spark Devil. Still lingering on that punt. But I did keep Carno. I did not burn that, and I do think, seeing that there's only a Spell Pierce in hand, there is a winning line, which is play Carno, copy it with a bunch of clones, and then they are in trouble. Because just getting one clone off of Carno means that they have to leave something back or kill the Carnos somehow, because they're at 16 too. Like it's just like, well, two Carnos would not be enough, because it would be like a 7-6 and an 8-7, so it's exactly 15 and not 16. But if I get 2 clones, then that's a whole different story too.
Right. And it could be almost enough if, like, you technically are not dead in 2 turns, right? Or unless, have you already taken the damage here? I think you have.
Right? I have, yes.
You went from 21 to 15. Yeah. So, like, Toni would need to add to his clock, which it's totally possible he can do, but also add to his clock while answering your follow-up of a Quint or a Spark Double. And that is difficult, especially because if you're Spark Doubling a Carno and then you mill into Quint, you can pay for a Spell Pierce with that, right? So that would let you get another 2 life trigger, which increases your clock by a whole turn if you're hitting, Carno into a single clone. I'm like 2 turns ahead here, so maybe people aren't following. But yeah, I really think Carno into a clone is probably good enough for you to win the game. Carno into 2 clones is almost assuredly good enough for you to win the game.
Yes.
And that's pretty likely. So I would go for Carno here, and therefore not use it on the Phoenix to keep pressure off.
And such a shame that just the Spark Double on the battlefield would have prevented 6 damage. Like that makes a huge difference too. To be fair, Toni could also have drawn 2 removal spells to access and still gotten in, but then he has to do that. He has to draw that, and he only drew 1 axe.
And then he's tapping out, and you can Quint, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of branching possibilities that are mostly good for you here.
Yeah. Well,
and I think the not taking actions is the part that's killing you this game, because you're allowing Toni to recoup bits and bits and bits of value every time that you're not forcing him to do things to answer what you're doing.
Yep.
I think that's really the core of like this matchup and the difficulty playing it, because it's all theoretical. You're all playing against like an empty, or not an empty, but like a face down hand that your opponent has, and you sort of need to like continue to force them to do things so that they can't do the things that are optimal for pressuring you.
Yes.
It's a really tough thing to like get used to, because it's just a tricky thing that not many Magic games really end up being. Yeah. But yeah, that's what this matchup is about, in my opinion.
Just a clarification: if Toni had 2 axes in hand, he can remove both and not be tapped out, because then like mill with the fairy, so that's exactly 4 mana, and then get back the Phoenix. So that
true. I guess I'm assuming like if he has the second axe, it's like instead of the fairy or something.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. But still, like 2 axes is very different to 1 axe. He had 1 axe and not 2, and a 2/4 in that place, or a 3/5 would have made a world of a difference here. So I keep Carno. I understand that that's this thread I have to slam next turn. Draw another Quint. And
it's actually kind of good for you.
Yeah, less chances that I will discover a Quint, right? So we have 2 clones outside of the deck, and we have 4 clones and 2 Quints. So we are quite favored to draw into clone, which puts us really advantageous, right? I slam the Carno, as we have mentioned.
Love it. Love it.
And we discover the Quint, unfortunately.
Ah, brutal.
Connive happens, bins a Phoenix, which I'm assuming top deck and bin, because otherwise why wouldn't have he binned it before? And there's the Spell
Right.
Pierce. So
Yep. And here's where like the cumulative I'm gonna eventually find my things of Phoenix really gets you. Obviously you got unlucky by hitting the Quint first. And now like it might be subtle for people watching this, like that completely swung the game. Because now you might even be dead this following turn, and even if you're not, you probably don't have a way to recover as long as Toni can disrupt your combo one more time.
Let's see. So there's a Cruise. Then they consider binning a third Phoenix.
Another Phoenix.
So
and that, I think you're dead, right?
A fourth Phoenix would mean I'm not still dead because it's.
Oh, no, you're going to one.
I go to
you're
one.
Going to one.
So bins yet another card, which is an Axe, Lightning Axe. Plays a tap land. 2 Phoenixes come in, and yeah, like it's not lethal yet. And there's no, I don't think that he's playing what's it called, the hazardous spike, or the
Spike field hazard.
Spike field hazard, yes, which is 1 damage, which would kill me over here. So he's not playing that in his list.
Right, 1 is very different from 0 playing against Tony's specific list.
So I remember Toni definitely sent the 3 Phoenixes in, and he was thinking, should I send the Shredder because it's not lethal? He does send it in, and that's correct. Do you know why that is correct?
I don't know. Explain.
The reason is, if I draw a shock land, I can't play it untapped then. If he doesn't swing with Shredder, I can play a shock land untapped and play around the Juari Disruption. He's keeping 2 mana open, so there's still a possibility to Juari Disruption a 6-drop. And that is correct to get me to 1. And I don't know, I mean, keeping it back over here does mean that he could connive again the Shredder and block and eat my Carnosaur.
Or just block and save life, I guess. But yeah, the issue there is like you don't actually have many ways to kill Toni, even if you can attack for 7 next turn, because it's really all about whether you're going off or not going off. Yeah, like 16 is pretty equivalent to 9 in terms of Toni's life total. So it's I like the attack with the Shredder a lot, pointing out that you did like you can't shock, which is huge. Like any single mana for you to break out of the Spell Pierce range is great, or Juari Disruption range.
At this point,
taking that option.
At this point, I need a Cavern of Souls or a basic. If I get that, I can play a Quint and win because it goes over Spell Pierce. But if he hadn't attacked with the Shredder, I could draw shock land, shock me, and then play Quint and play around the Spell Pierce.
Yep. So all of this, right? All of this has happened. The game has sort of spiraled out of control for us. We are we've just been attacked in the air with a bunch of flyers. Our opponent has interaction up. They have 2 mana, not just 1, so they can have multiple things, right? All of that is true. And we're still probably going to win if we draw an untapped land. It isn't a shock. That's the power of this deck, man. Like, it can win out of absolutely nowhere sometimes, and like you have a chance down to the bitter end. So that's why you play this.
And again, we also got unlucky with the Carnosaur. Had we gotten a clone, after myself playing like not optimal and making quite a big punt, I still almost won the turn before, and I can still win this turn. We draw an Impersonator. So we have options though. We have options, and then we
do.
What is your instinct here?
So I am trying to play around. What are the possibilities? There's Spell Pierce.
The second one.
There's Juari Disruption. There are exactly 1 of each of those left in Toni's deck. There are also burn spells. There's about 6 of them left, 7 of them left, something like that. And 2 of those would be able to respond to one of our clones on the Carnosaur and kill the Carno and make it so that we fizzle, basically. So really, the question is, are you playing around 2 one-ofs that Toni has to have one of each, I guess? Or are you trying to play it around 2 burn spells, like both, where Toni has to have both, but he has 7 copies in the deck? Um, this is really interesting and really close. It's also relevant, right? How many clones are out of our deck?
3 already.
3 already, yeah.
We have 1.
And we are under enough pressure in the air where like gaining 14 life might not do it for us. Although 14 actually might bring us down to 1 again, which would be good. Although there's probably going to be another connive, so that doesn't work. Here's where the specific math comes in. So if we resolve a Quint, let's say Toni doesn't have the spell pierce, and we start chaining with Quint. Let's say, right, because we would be making this line in order to play around a double burn spell and accepting that we lose to spell pierce.
Mm-hmm.
So let's assume Toni does have double burn spell.
Yeah.
And they can't hit Quint, but they can hit Carno. So we're not going to be able to do the Carno copy thing and get more triggers, probably. So we play Quint, we -4, or -3, whatever it is. In response, Toni kills our Carnosaur because he's making the optimal play, even though it's hard to see. I think we just have to assume he will. Quint goes and flips. Let's say we hit an Impersonator first. That's a drain for 2.
Mm-hmm.
Then it copies the Quint. Quint dies. Impersonator isn't on the battlefield. Now we have, I believe, only 2 Spark Doubles left in library. Is that right? Or do we have 3?
No, we have 2.
Because is there 1 in our yard?
Actually, we have both Impersonators out.
No, we have 3.
We have 3 Spark
Yeah,
Doubles.
we have 3 Spark Doubles left. Okay. So we've drained them for 2 already. We find a Spark Double, drain them for another 2, copy Quint. We find another Spark Double, drain them for 4, copy Quint. Then we find another Spark Double, drain them for 6, and we still can only copy Quint because Toni killed the Carno.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 2, 2, 4, 6. So that is, what is that? That's 14, right? So that would drain for 14, put Toni to 2, and put us to 15. We are then dead to Electric Thread or Conniving Away a spell. Okay, so if specifically Toni has burn spell, but does not have spell pierce, and we first hit Impersonator off of Quint, we very likely die.
We cannot hit Impersonator. We drew Impersonator.
Oh, we have both Impersonators in hand. Okay, that actually changes the math. It's actually bad for us, though.
Graveyard.
Both of them are out.
Yeah.
Only have 3 Spark Doubles left in our library. Mm-hmm. So then we're not even draining for 14. We're draining for...
2 plus 4 plus 6.
Yeah.
12.
Right. Yeah, so we're only doing 12. In which case, we're still dead, actually, because we drew the Impersonator this turn. Ooh, that's rough. Yeah, no, all of the math I was doing was assuming there was still 1 Impersonator, which is wrong. So I think Quint is non-viable here. I don't think we can win by playing Quint. Well, okay, we can if Toni doesn't have the burn and doesn't have the spell pierce.
Yes.
Maybe only specifically has the disruption, because that would mean we can attack for 7.
Yes.
And drain for 12 and kill him. Okay, so playing Quint, we've determined, plays around Jawari Disruption, but only specifically Jawari Disruption and nothing else.
Jawari Disruption and just 1 burn spell for Toni.
Yes. Okay. So that is a line where it makes it possible that we win the game. So noting that, right? Like we have that as a play. If we determine nothing else wins us the game, then we should make that play.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are our other options? We can copy Carnosaur. The only upside to that would be if we think it wins us the game this turn, and the only way it would do that is if we are finding Quint and then comboing, which is the same or worse math. I don't want to do the exact math, but it's exactly the same or worse as just playing Quint, because our only goal would be to find Quint.
It's quite worse,
so
right?
I think that also isn't viable.
It's quite worse because we only have 1 Quint inside library. We have 2 in hand, and the previous one got spell pierce. So we have 1 Quint and 3 clones in hand. There's 25% chance that we hit Quint and we can win the game if we clone Carnosaur.
Also, of course, that line just loses to double burn spell,
Yes.
straight up. So that's notable. Okay. Playing Garuda, does that do anything? I don't think so. It loses to just Aura Disruption. It loses to just like, whiffing. And then even then, we're still just trying to quit because we need to gain life and we're dead in the air.
Yes.
And there's no way we can like drain them for more life. So yeah, Garuda's not viable.
I think Garuda is even smaller.
It's also true.
It's even smaller than the clone because we need to hit a Carno, and we need to hit a Quint from that Carno, and then we can win.
And we need to not hit a clone off of the Garuda. Yeah. The Garuda's like terrible here.
Or we could play Garuda and then chain clones and then mill them. That is also a victory path. But
true. But I don't think we have enough clones left.
We have three clones left. We need to mill one clone in each of the 4 mills, and we mill them out.
Right.
They have 20 cards in library.
Right. So we mill them for 4. That hits a clone. Then we mill them for another 4. So that's 8. That hits another clone. We mill them for another 4. That's 12. That hits another clone. And then we hit our last clone, and that mills them for 16. Right?
Oh, so it's not even okay. Not yet.
Yeah.
So that's not a line.
It's
even.
Close. It's very close. If we didn't draw a Personator, it would have technically been possible, but also extremely unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's viable either. And going back to our first line, even if Toni does have double burn spell, I think it's possible that he doesn't see the line to kill the Carno right away.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, that gives us a couple percentage points, maybe. So, I think after talking it through, there's only one possible line here, which is just slam Quint and lose the Spell Pierce, and accept that. Yeah,
and hoping that the second spell Pierce is somewhere in the deck. Which, to be fair, there's 20 cards in the deck. It's still 1/3. We already saw the first one.
Totally possible.
And that's where I landed. I said like, Quint is the only real way the one play that maximizes the chances to win this game. And I played, and there was
totally
spell Pierce.
And there you go. Yep.
All of that to say that Quint was the correct play. There were a lot of people in chat saying we should clone. And Toni actually had 2 burn spells in hand, so if he played correctly, we still lose this game. And people were saying like, if you clone and then they kill the Carno, that doesn't do anything. But even if he didn't have 2 burn spells in hand, we only win the game 25% of the time, and that is we discover the Quint.
Right. And so you might as well play the Quint and you'll win the game 100% of the time if Toni doesn't have anything.
If Toni doesn't have the double burn. So,
yeah.
Quint was the correct play there, sadly. Second spell Pierce, and we lose. Very sad for that punt.
What a difficult, frustrating game. You were so close the entire time, and I do think if you had played a little better, you probably win that. Brutal game to look back on for sure.
But honestly, again, untapped Cavern of Souls or basic wins me the game here.
Right, and still a hair's breadth from winning, just via that line.
Yeah. So. And just playing the Spark Double when I had to, or drawing a land before too, because when I drew the Migration, if I had drawn the untapped land, I could then just slam the Carno there, So
right.
Small little things that didn't go my way. Unfortunate discovering Quint with Carno, and making that big punt. That's how Phoenix won this game, even they were unfavored on game 1. So. Let's move on to game 2. On the play again. This hand.
Ooh, this hand is slow. But it does have every ingredient. You've got your A, your good mana, your B, your ramper, and your C, your threat. I don't think there's a world where I can mulligan this hand. You also have, you often like to note cycling lands, and those are definitely relevant here to get them out of your hand if you want to draw untapped lands and have at least a turn where you can do that. I think this is a pretty easy keep.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I think this is certainly a keep. I have all the lands that I need. I have a ramper too. And I'm even on the play, so definitely.
And even if you draw Binding, you'll have that on turn 2, which is a slight tick up for the hand. So yeah, easy keep.
Slide. and we draw a binding, which
There
is
you go.
amazing. It's just one of the cards we want to see. So play the Sagat. No need
Answers a turn 2 Shredder, which is great.
I don't need to put stops, but I still wait a
Yep.
bit. I still wait a bit before it's like, oh yeah, I'm putting stops. You know, play a hall.
Gotta make him keep him honest. Yeah.
Shredder comes, and this time I do have the binding, so immediately remove that.
Yeah, that's an easy call.
Shock that in because I want to ramp.
Yep.
3 lands and all blue, and nothing. Nothing was played.
Yeah, this is Tony's controlling game that he confused me with in a couple of the finals matches. I was like, whoa, I'm not under any pressure, huh? I must be in a good position. And then Tony's, aha, no, I have all the answers.
So anyway, I ramp. I don't think it matters which land you get here. Maybe it was correct.
I don't think it does. Maybe it's an island so that you can impersonate next turn, but there's no reason for you to impersonate.
Yep.
So,
and I
yeah,
have another Sagat.
as long as you play the Zagoth Triumph on the following turn, then yeah, there's no downside to whatever you get.
Draw the basic, and here is there consideration to get Karuga in hand to cycle the land?
Yeah,
I
think I'm buying Karuga over cycling a land. I can always do that later, and I'd rather just be able to have the option of playing Karuga next turn into like counter magic or something. Yeah,
I do play the Sagat, and I buy Karuga, leaving up white, so faking that I have another binding.
Auto Tapper's not going to get us today.
Yep, this time I tapped correctly. Flashing Brazen Borrower makes a lot of sense. Puts up suddenly some pressure on us. And I don't have the binding. If I had the binding, I would also remove that on the spot. So Toni knows that I don't have binding. Played a tapped Spiral of Canal. Gets in for
Gotta
3.
have been top decked.
And passes again.
Yep, I mean, you're under pressure. So now with Tony's like post-board plan of having tons of interaction, he can really afford to just like keep everything up and keep pressuring you.
Draw for the turn is a swamp. What are we thinking here?
Ooh, okay. So this is where you got to have some bravery and think about whether you cast Carno into whatever interaction Toni could have. There's Draw Disruption.
Yes.
There's Spell Pierce if you hit a Quint. There is Aether Gust, obviously, post-board. There is Mystical Dispute. There's a ton of things Toni could have here, and likely does, given that he's just been passing the turn.
3 Disputes.
Yeah, Dispute, Gust, Brazen Borrower even does it if you mill into a clone. The second Brazen Borrower.
Yep.
Draw Disruption. So there's a lot of stuff Toni can have. But question is, are you in a better position if the game keeps developing and you're just passing back and forth? You're under pressure right now. You could go for like a Karuga, still gets hit by all the counter spells, but then next turn maybe you can slam Carno, and that's a little safer, given that you've used one of Tony's interaction spells. You can also use the Carno to get rid of the Brazen Borrower and just keep the pressure off. That's an option, although it gets rid of one of our threats, which threat density is quite important against post-board Phoenix, where they have lots of answers to your stuff. This is a really tough call. I'm not feeling good about how this game is developing so far. I think it's possible that I just want to slam the Carno, force Toni to have it, and then next turn, if I don't draw another threat, just start cycling my lands and force Toni to have it again as quickly as possible. He's only got 5 cards in hand. That's a lot, but it's not 7. And yeah, I just don't like how this game is really developing. I could see it being Karuga. I'm really not sure here. I could see it being Karuga. I could see it being Carno. I could see it being pass cycle. Cycle is not too bad because you're digging toward like a cavern. Yeah, actually, this is sort of against my instincts as a Quint player, but I actually do think the right line here is pass cycle. I think that's where I'm landing. It lets you jam again next turn, but with a small chance of that being like a more sure thing if you draw a cavern. Yeah, I think that's the best balanced line. You're going to want to cycle eventually, and you just want to kind of see what the rest of your hand is before determining whether or not to go for it. I think it's also like a totally viable option to just be like, I'm brave. I'm going to make them have it, and then I'm going to make them have it again when I draw a future threat. And just go for your like multiple 25% chances to win the
Yep.
game.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I might do that, but I think past cycle is like probably the best line by a little bit, although it's close because I'm still not feeling good if I'm doing that.
Hmm. Okay. Remember that Toni passed the previous turn with 3 mana up to answer a Quint because we were threatening like ramping and then slamming a Quint. So with 3 mana up, my instinct says he has Mystical Dispute because Dispute doesn't get discounted against a Quint. And if I play Carno here, it's most likely getting Mystical Disputed, and then I don't have any other threat in hand. Was my worry. I am under pressure.
That's totally a risk.
Yeah. I'm under.
It's totally a risk. Oh yeah.
I'm under pressure, but it's only a 3/1 so far. It's not. There's nothing else, and I feel like I can spare one more turn, cycle both lands, and dig towards a cavern. So I was really hoping to see a cavern in after postboard with all those counter spells. I thought like, okay, best thing I can do: find a cavern, slam Garuda, slam Carnosaur, and go to town. So
yeah, I think you're right. I just am noting that I'm not happy about it. That's really all I was trying to say with that, because like I'm just scared to let the game continue developing and let Phoenix continue shaping their hand while I'm under pressure. It is hard for me to see beyond you drawing specifically a cavern. It's hard for me to see it being safer to deploy a threat in future turns than this turn.
Mm-hmm.
It's not safe this turn. You accurately described why it's not safe, but I don't think it's getting safer unless you draw a cavern, which is the reason why I think you want to cycle your lands and dig to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like also cycling 2 lands will also up the chances of me drawing a threat, because slam the Carno,
yes, it for sure does.
Gets countered. There's not that many draws that I can make then to draw threats, right? I can then cycle twice, but then it's the same thing.
But then you're skipping the same turn, essentially. Yeah. So I think, for what it's worth, the cycle is right. Like, I think that is the right line. And
I did play the Swamp and passed. Gets in. Would you here cycle and see if you draw a Leyline or another threat, and you can
I
the
think
Cardinal?
it's probably strictly correct, just because there's not much else you're representing. You don't really have instants in your deck besides Leyline and Carno. So I think it is correct to cycle here, and you're cycling the Zagoth Triumph, of course, leading up a white. But I probably would have missed it, to be honest.
It's really correct. I did wait until the end of the turn to do it, and I did take the 3. And the Spiral of Canal, and nothing else. So here I'm reading. I'm reading Toni for like, okay, he has to have like counter spells in hand.
For sure.
Cycle the Triumph, gets me another Triumph. Cycle the second Triumph, and get a Tanuki.
Yep.
And the draw for the turn, Stomping Ground.
Whew. Yeah, this is what I meant about not getting better. You don't have enough to Karuga plus cycle, I believe.
Nope. I didn't draw,
which also means you don't have enough to Karuga plus player and dispute. All right. Now I think you have to just slam the Carno and make him have it. Maybe play a forest to play around Jawari Disruption, but like I think I'm like pretty low likelihood to win this game, but my best out is probably like slam Carno, gets countered, untap Quint or something, and just like top deck out of it. I basically need to be doing things that force answers so that Toni can't keep shaping hand or adding pressure to the board, because other than that, what are we doing? We're cycling to another cavern, or we're playing a Tanuki or a Karuga. Neither of those do anything. I think you just have to slam. Oh, okay. Actually, you could just use Carno to kill Borrower, which can't be countered, can't really be interacted with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's better. Maybe I'm doing that plus cycling. I actually like that better because like the one way we can get out of this scenario is just by taking the pressure off and hoping Toni doesn't have a way to add more with a Phoenix or something, which post board is more likely because he's cutting like spells and mostly they're burn spells, but he's bringing in a lot of counter spells that can kind of sit in his hand and clog it up and mean that he can't really like shape his hand as much. So actually, yeah, I'm wrong. I don't think you slam the Carno. I think it's pretty obvious that he's got something to answer it. I think you actually here want to use your Carno to get rid of the borrower and then just cycle your land and continue trying to dig to more threats and caverns. But I think that's the best line.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What do you think?
Well, just pointing out that if we want to slam a threat, there's a possibility to just put the Tanuki on the board too, as a 6/5.
Yes, yeah. That's totally possible.
It's maybe not the most intuitive thing. I still don't like.
But I will say, I think Toni only doesn't counter that if he thinks he can win through it, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like it's like browbeat. It's giving your opponent the option to make a play that they know they can win through. So yeah, sometimes it's right to play Tanuki just because you think you can sneak it through and you have a suspicion that you can win the game with it. But I don't think this is one of those scenarios. Yeah. Worth noting, though. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cycling the land and answering the borrower also looks nice. I'm still kind of like thinking, why don't I have a Cavern of Souls? You know, like I really want a Cavern of Souls. Why is it not in my hand?
We play 4, yeah.
I play 4, and he has a lot of counter spells in hand. I'm reading Toni for Mystical Dispute the whole time, by the way, which also leads,
which I think is correct.
Yeah. Which leads me to see I have 6 mana. I haven't played a land yet. I can ramp with Tanuki, and I have an untapped land. Next turn, I have 9 mana, because play a land.
9's a lot more than 8 in this scenario.
9 is a lot more than 6 and 8. And with 9, I can play Carnosaur, pay for Dispute, and
pay for a Spell Pierce on the Quint that you go into. Yeah.
So that's it.
It's dead to 2 pieces of interaction, but that's better than 1.
It is, but it plays around better against the counter spell that we've been reading Toni all this time, right?
Right.
Right. That's ultimately where I landed. I said like, okay, cycle and ramp, and the next turn I'm slamming Carno, and I go through a Mystical Dispute.
Yeah.
I
think that's pretty reasonable.
The borrower is not killing me just yet. Like, yeah, it's been putting pressure, but I also don't see how without a shredder, like they can bin the Phoenixes that easily at this point. And I'm banking on like next turn I'm resolving a Carno somehow, especially if they don't keep up 2 Mystical Disputes.
Yeah. You're basically going for the drop to low life total, but give yourself the maximum chance to stick a threat.
Yes.
That you possibly can, which is a very like common game plan with Quint for sure. And I like seeing that line. I didn't see it at all, but I think that's pretty smart.
I saw it in the.
I don't know if it's better than getting pressure off of you, because that just means that like the game can continue to go on and you can continue to draw more threats and jam them through answers. But it's at least something that you absolutely should consider, and I think it's probably pretty viable for a game plan.
Yep. I'm still hoping to maybe draw a Cavern or something, and.
Right. You still have that out. You're still cycling.
And Carnosaur is still the only threat I have in hand. We've cycled quite a bit, and we haven't seen another one. Makes me more uneasy to jam against a counterspell. And seeing that I can play around Dispute the next turn, that's why I take that line. So play it, tapped, Stomping Grounds, pass the turn.
And you still have the option to kill the borrower if something crazy happens and you determine you want to.
Exactly. Like, let's say for some...
Which is why, for what it's worth, I think cycling before you take damage is going to be correct here as well.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, they could go like a Prankster, mill 4 Phoenixes, and then reanimate the Phoenixes, and I could be dead. So then, in that scenario, I channel the Carnosaur and I kill the borrower.
Right.
But he doesn't go for that. Just 3 more in the air. Play another land, Shredder, and nothing else. So I'm rooting for a lot of counter spells in the hand right now, because why wouldn't he try to connive at least here, right?
Yep.
So
yeah, like you're right. You're absolutely right. I'm reading exactly the same thing from Tony's hand, and I think it's like super, super, super likely that he has a lot of counter spells. However, I do want to note that like reading is not exactly the same thing as knowing in Magic. And there are possible hands Tony could have where he's making these exact same plays and doesn't have anything. Tony could have a bunch of lands and a spell pierce in hand, right? Like, it is important if you decide that you can't beat the counter spells anyway, even if Tony does have them, it is pretty important to still grab the 2% equity of the games where Tony just has nothing and has a terrible draw, right? So that's why I'm just continually checking every turn, like, can we actually beat multiple pieces of interaction? If we can't, maybe we just slam Carno and hope for the best. That's why I'm doing that. I think it is wrong. I think your line does try to play around a little bit of interaction in a way that still wins you the game through that, which is maybe like a 10% or a 15% line instead of a 5% line. But that is why I'm sort of crazily like, I totally agree. Tony has a bunch of counter spells, and you should play into them anyway, or you should at least consider playing into them anyway. It's a bit of like a crazy person thing to kind of do, but sometimes that's what you have to do, and it is relevant to think about. These are like the tiny edges that you try to gain in evaluating games of Magic.
Yep.
Which is why I love it. It's such a great game.
Important here to first ramp and then cycle. Gets one land less into the deck. Chances minimal for that.
True.
That's what I do. I think I put a plains and then I cycle. And finally I get a second thread. Finally I get a second Carno. So now it's jamming time, and I have the insurance of having a second Carno in hand, which I think it's pretty good. 2 mystical disputes don't get me. I can pay for the first one, and then there's not enough mana to pay. Dispute plus Pierce, and then I discover Quint would be bad, but still not the end of the world.
I will say 2 disputes do get you if you mill into a clone, right? Or if you discover into a clone, because then they only cost 1.
True.
So that is relevant. Like at some point, Tony can disrupt your combo with 2 disputes.
True, but then, I slam Carno, 2 disputes. I still have a Carno on board, right? I'm not dead to the Hall of
You do, but you're under enough pressure in the air that I'm still pretty worried. But again, like, what's the alternative, right? It's not like you can play around 2 disputes, so I don't think there's any reason to do so or to worry about it.
Play the forest, play the Carno. And let's see this. So Dual Disruption. I'm like, I have to pay the one. I don't have the Carno anymore to pay, but I cannot just get Dual Disruption and accept that. So I pay.
Right.
And then Ether Gust. So the Ether Gust, very annoying over here.
Yeah. They always have the one of.
Bin the Cruise. Put it on top, and I'm dead if Tony has a land and activates Hall of Storm Giants, or if there's a Phoenix. But he hasn't been a Phoenix over here, so still okay, quote unquote, if there's not a drawn a land. And the next turn, I can still jam the cards, right?
Right.
So
and that will win you the game, in theory.
So draws the land. And consider. So no untapped land for the Hall of Storm Giants.
So now, the Hall is dead for this turn, which is important.
Bins another Shredder. Opt. And bins with the Connive the Phoenix. And now we're dead. So that goes to the bottom.
Yep.
Treasure Cruise, get cards in hand, and doesn't play around. Tony doesn't play around the Leyline Binding. Just kills me there.
Yeah.
But I will.
What a rough match.
That was rough. It turns out that during the whole game, Tony had a Disruption and an Ether Gust in hand. There was no mystical dispute. So obviously, to the eyes of the spectator, looks like I played very passively, because if I had slammed the Carno one or two turns earlier, that gets either gusted to the top of my deck. I can slam it the next turn and I win, right? Because there's like no.
Well, you slam the. Oh right, it goes to the top of the deck. Yeah. That's tough.
So of course, if I knew that there was no Mystical Dispute in hand, or no negate or anything like that, I would have slammed Carno earlier. If it's just Ether Gust, sure, I slam the Carno. But if it were a dispute and I don't draw a threat after that, I lose the game, right? So that's why I played around the Mystical Dispute as much as I could. And then Toni's play of Juari Disruption, make me pay an extra 1, and then Ether Gust, that was excellent play, because he read me for having a second Carnosaur, so that if he draws an untapped land, he wins with the Hall of Storm Giants, and if he only draws a Phoenix, he still also wins, right? So also very, very masterful play for doing that, making me pay the extra 1. And again, it was a very, very tight edge. Like, if I survive this turn and I slam Carno, I have a very good chance of winning this game, because I have played around the disputes and all of this. No Cavern of Souls that I drew. I wanted to draw one this whole game. Sadly didn't. And there was no Mystical Dispute in hand. So maybe jamming, there was a chance there. But if there was a Mystical Dispute, I think my line of playing was quite correct, especially in game 2.
Yeah. And Toni was playing exactly as if he had a dispute. So I don't think your reading of that was wrong at all. I think it was accurate. I think if there was a mistake, and I don't even necessarily think there was, but if there is a mistake, I think it's that, like, that thing I said about, okay, you read something in their hand, right? But that doesn't mean you put 100% probability on it. That means you put 85% probability on it. And if you decide, which you didn't, and I think that was correct, but if you decide that you can't play around it even still, then you go for the 15%. Right? Maybe they don't have it, and maybe I'm just misinterpreting this information somehow, and they have something else weird, some other combination of stuff. That's what it turned out to be. But I think if you're reading Toni's play here in this game, I would put higher percentage chance that he has at least one Mystical Dispute than him having Aether Gust plus something else, right? And so even though he had that, right, I don't think your play was necessarily wrong. It would be difficult to go back and analyze exactly if it were right or wrong, but like, yeah, these are the kind of things where whether or not they actually had it, you really have to be viewing the game from the perspective of the information you had at the time and figuring out what reasonable deductions you can make from that. That's really hard.
Yep.
Really, really, really hard.
It is indeed. I think I played quite well this second game. The first game, of course, I did that punt over there. If anything, there's also a reasoning to kill the Brazen Borrower on site, because it's the only thing that's pressuring over there.
It really pressured you a lot that game, and meant that Toni could only get through a single turn of you trying to combo, but then kill you immediately after, which was a big deal.
And also, by the way, the Phoenix was top decked among those opts and considers in this turn over here. So again, didn't draw that land, and Toni could have gotten unlucky and not draw a Phoenix, and then it's next turn for me, right? So, quote unquote, there was also a bit of luck involved over here. What I'm trying to say with all of this is, it's either we kill the Borrower on site and rely on the top of our deck, and we hope not to draw a Cavern of Souls, because imagine I channel the Carnosaur and then the next draw is a Cavern of Souls. I just whip myself, right? It would have been pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean... Well, okay, that would have been bad in the sense that it would have won you the game if you hadn't done the decision you made. But honestly, I will say, like, I think once you use the Carno, you, especially if you're in the game, right, and trying to make this decision, but even in analyzing the game after, I don't think drawing a Cavern of Souls after that is a negative play, right? Or a negative thing to happen, because when you make that Carno decision, you are making it with the information you have available to you at the time. You already know it is possible for you to draw a Cavern the next turn. Whether or not you actually do has pretty much no bearing on the decision that you made at the time. I think playing, using the Carno to get rid of the Borrower is a play that you would make based on the principle of this deck, which is I will draw more threats as the game goes on. That's like a foundational reason why you're playing Garudas. It's because it's good against Thoughtseize in the red-black matchup, and because you can play the games to take pressure off yourself, knowing that you top deck better than other decks in general, and you can have instant wins when you find the right cards. So I will like push back a little bit on the idea that like you should think about drawing a cavern and then being sad or whatever, right? Like based on that decision. That's not exactly what you're saying, I understand. But
Yep.
I really think focusing on that as a like possibility is in some ways a mistake of focus, in terms of like figuring out what are the right lines and what are the right decisions in the game of Magic.
And it's not even the worst thing either, because I can play Cavern and then play Karuga, you know, and draw a card and like draw into
Exactly.
my things.
Right.
So,
yeah. Totally.
I think you should be aware of what you could potentially top deck within the next few turns. I think that's also that was also a good thing to cycle the 2 lands that turn. It's like, okay, I have a lot of draws. A Cavern would be.
I like that line quite a bit.
A Cavern would be excellent. And then I thought like, okay, I can ramp enough to play around Mystical Dispute, which I believe that they have in hand. Also, by the way, I would have slammed earlier if I had just one other threat in hand. But I only had the Cardinal, and I didn't want to risk losing my only threat.
That's the difficult psychology of this deck.
That's
like,
difficult.
I only have one. I might not draw another. And yes, you might not draw another. You might just die to drawing a ton of lands or bindings or whatever. Like, that is always true. And it's really just a question of like, yes, but is it more probable than not that you will draw another? That's usually the reason why you tend to just jam, you know, as our team had as our motto for this tournament. But that's a joke, right? Like it is not always correct to jam in this deck at all. It is more correct than people might think, but it is still, you have these really, really difficult turns where you don't know what threat to play, which threat is like slightly more likely to let you combo off or win the game or get through their interaction or whatever. And you have these turns where you're trying to read like the probability distribution of what they could have in hand and which of those things ends up mattering for the threat that you're actually playing. And how likely are you to draw more if you get rid of this one? Do you have cycling lands? Do you have Karuga to draw stuff? How many turns is the game going to go after that? Oh man, I love this Quint deck. I'm gonna write up like a primer on it this week, I think. And like, yes, it is a simple deck. It is easier to play than something like Phoenix, but there's some real beauty and complexity in the decisions here. And I'm so glad we had the time to just like dive super deep into them with your matches. This is really fun.
And just a 1 or 2 minute comment, with this specific list with so many counter spells and interaction for a combo, there is a good consideration of putting 1 or 2 thought distortions from our sideboard against this specific list of Phoenix. It's not correct against lists with maybe 3 counter spells or 4 counter spells, but when it's like 8 counter spells, and there were like some games also in the finals with you, right, where like landing a thought distortion, taking away like 3 or 4 counter spells would have won the game too. It is a consideration, but we normally don't sideboard in thought distortion against this matchup because the window where it's going to be really good is quite narrow. You can be getting beaten down by Shredders and Phoenixes, and then thought distortion doesn't do anything. Maybe there is not that many interaction spells in their hand, and so thought distortion also doesn't do much, right? So, but against this specific list, it might have been correct to side in 1 or 2, which we didn't do because when we tested this in our team, we were not seeing such a counterspell heavy list from Phoenix. But that is all 6 rounds of Explorer. And thank you, Ryan, so much for analyzing with so many minutiae and so many details. Really happy to have gone through all of this. I don't know if you have any other thoughts to the tournament. We did very well with Quint. I think all 3 limited specialists. We're playing against the top of the crop here in Constructed, and we still did 3-3 in the Swiss, all of us. You got to go to the top 8 thanks to your 3-0 in the draft. Ethan and I only did 2-1, you know, and that prevented us from being in the top 8. But I did 2 wins out of 9 in AC4, which could technically be 3 since I punted very hard on the last round. And here I got 5 wins out of 9. The improvement was there, and having had a team to test with made a difference. I selected this deck mainly because of you, Ryan, who still believed in it, even though most, like everyone else, had like kind of given up on it during our testing. And just the fact that, hey, this deck puts me in positions to win games, to top deck the correct cards. And we had matches where we didn't top deck what we needed and we lost. We had matches where we top decked and we won. And there were definitely some mistakes that I made over here, but all in all, I think I played quite well the deck, and it was a good deck against the meta. I think against so many vampires, it was a good choice to have, and I think we caught quite a lot of people off guard with it. So all in all, super happy with how the tournament went. I don't know, Ryan, if you want to say a few parting thoughts.
I also agree. I am happy with how the tournament went. I think, like, as I think I said in the first video that we did here, the margins with this deck and just in general in Magic, especially constructed, like, are so thin. You don't draw the untapped land in a certain spot, and I do. That's a 1 match difference, right? A 1 game win difference that means the difference between top 8ing and like getting to Worlds and not. And we were playing this deck as a team. I think we all played it pretty well, and like as well as we had tested with it, which I think like we got some good reps in and we knew how we wanted to attack the format. And at a certain point, you kind of let go, you give in to the gods of variance, and you just say, hey, one of us might get there. Even if we don't, we are making the best decisions that we can in any given moment. And like truly letting that go, even in such a high stakes tournament like this, I think is genuinely very important for getting better as a Magic player. Being able to be in that mindset where you understand what the probabilities are and you care a lot about evaluating what the most likely thing to let you win the game is. But once you make that decision, you look back, or you stop looking back, and you just move forward and make the next correct decision. That is the mindset I think you have to have for top level Magic. And even if you have it, right, you will only win some of the time when you get extremely lucky. And that's what happened for me. It almost happened for you. We had a really good deck choice. We positioned ourselves well, and we're all playing for top 8 in the last round. I got a good matchup. You got a 50-50 matchup that didn't coin flip your way. Magic is beautiful. I love it, and it's so hard, as I continue to say, but I come back to it because like that's just how I feel about all of this. Yeah. Thank you for having me on to analyze these games. This is what it's all about. This is the fun part, is just getting to like sink your teeth into a decision that you only have a couple seconds to make in an actual tournament, like with people watching you, super high pressure. And yeah, it's fun. It's really fun. Mm-hmm. I'm just like excited for you to play more tournaments. Now that we're friends, we get to chat on Discord about our results. And yeah, like that's the goal, right? It's just continue improving and making connections.
Yes.
So I'm glad we could do that.
And again, like we almost rallied. We lost the first 2 constructed rounds. We got 3 consecutive wins and just barely scratched over there. And I got knocked out by the champion, right? So that's also
champ. I mean, what a Phoenix player! Like, if you think playing this deck is hard, and it is, try playing Phoenix. Oh my god! And doing it at such a level that Toni did, like, I'm in awe. Yeah. I'm truly in awe.
Just to say, also another praise for Toni. He's such a nice guy. I'm half Spanish, I speak Spanish natively, and I contacted him the next day. He told me like I am absolutely like a zombie right now. I think because it was like 3 a.m. in the night when in Spain when the tournament finished. So he slept until like past midday or whatever, and he said like I remember absolutely nothing from the tournament. Like there were so many decisions and I've forgotten everything because my mind just couldn't keep up. Such a nice person. Can completely recommend that you follow him too. But Ryan, thanks for coming. Good luck in the World Championship. we'll be cheering for you unless I somehow
Thank
qualify myself, but will be quite unlikely that that happens at this stage. Best of luck with that. Best of luck for the future tournaments. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you, viewers, if you have watched all of this. It's about 4 hours of analysis.
Anyone who stuck around through all of this is a
Cheers.
sicko like us. So I appreciate them. Yeah, cheers. Absolutely.
So thank you very much. And stay connected and stay tuned for maybe some more analysis down the line. Thank you very much for watching. And thank you, Ryan.